with the exception of the exempt item at the end. I notice we have got some members of Trust Housing residents here, in that case, to allow them to hear the debate without actually having to sit through presentations, which are items 3 and 4, and 10, we members' agreement to actually move item 7 to first item of business. Councillor Foster?
Yes, Chair, I'm totally in agreement with that, but there are still some people outside waiting and others arriving. I spoke to them just on the way in, and I can't see them in. Perhaps if somebody could nip along and tell them that we're taking item 7 so that those that are here can come in and hear it. If we just delay it for 2 minutes today.
I'm quite happy to wait a couple of minutes to make sure everybody that wants to hear the debate and item 7 is actually in the room.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, members, for giving us time to get the members of the public in. As I said, I'll take item 7 first. The Trust Committee report. I believe Mr. O'Neill, you'll be speaking to the report. Do you want to give us a bit of background and anything else you want to add to the report, please? Mike's not on.
Rather than talk about the report, it might be helpful if I just take members through a kind of fairly brief chronology of events that will hopefully inform discussion around the report content. During 2012 at officer level, we were approached by Trust Housing Association, who advised us that they'd undertaken a national review of their housing support contracts, and that at board level and nationally they'd adopted an organisational position that they weren't prepared to operate housing support contracts that were running at a deficit. That prompted us to take a report to this subcommittee on the 25th of September 2012, and in that report we recommended paying deficit funding for 2012-13, and the sum that was agreed by the committee was £33,980. To help try and resolve the issue in the longer term, there was a second recommendation that said that Strategic Housing Services would work with colleagues in social work services and NHS and Dumfries and Galloway to undertake a service review with Trust Housing Association to explore options to make the services delivered by trusts more sustainable in the longer term. Now, since the 25th of September 2012, we've done exactly that. We have worked closely with colleagues in NHS and social work, but during the course of those discussions, social work took the view that this was a strategic housing issue and a matter purely for strategic housing to take forward without their further involvement. That decision resulted in the options contained in front of members in the report today, and really, I think at this point it'd be as well just opening up discussion to members about the content of the report and discussion in the way forward. But that's the kind of background and sequence of events that actually took place.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Well, for some time now, the mantra of this council has been to protect the vulnerable and elderly within our society. We've got the chance to do that today. I will confess I met with Trust Housing. I've one of those facilities within my ward in Sederunt, and I met with Bob McDougall and the residents on Monday. And there is real consternation and concern amongst the residents. This has got to be addressed one way or the other to put those people's minds at ease. I've read the report. I don't know why it took so long to arrive. It was a bit like the 7th Cavalry. It just came over the top of the hill before the committee meeting, and yet we've known about it for some time. I can only imagine there was some shuffling going on in the background, but that is pure conjecture. 3.6 in the report refers to the fact, in simple terms, that if we approve this today, we run the risk of other bodies coming out of the woodwork. Well, I would contend that any grant application is akin to a planning application. You deal with each one on its own merit. If we approve this today and other ones come forward, we deal with them as they're required at the time. So I don't accept that as a valid argument. I would also cast members' minds back last week to the EEI committee, where we approved some £600,000 a year to top up Shank's contract because they weren't trading profitably. And if we didn't put that money in, the council would have greater expense in the future if we had to retender. Well, I suggest if we don't put in the 47k today, social work will end up having to pick up about 100k. So it's the exact same logic and the exact same principles that we applied a week ago last Tuesday. I'm in mind to give what Trust House are needing. I don't think it's unreasonable. There has been a history in the past, and maybe I was part of it as a previous councillor, where these arm's length bodies, we pushed them to the periphery, let them make the cuts. The council kept going on as best as we could, and the trust housings of this world were not given inflationary uplifts. They had to make cuts or threatened to make cuts, and they appeared the bodies and not the council. But let's be honest, today we as a council can put this money in, we can get the status quo continued. That would give time for housing and social work to get together around the table, the administration, everybody else. But it takes the ticking clock away, because if we don't put this in today, the likes of night wardens will disappear in May. Now that is totally unacceptable to the people I represent, and I would move that we give the Trust Association £41,607 today.
Sorry, Councillor Geddes.
Sorry?
I didn't have my mic
Oh,
on.
right, okay. As you're well aware, Chair, that you and I and the other two Mid-Galloway members had a meeting with the tenants and tenants advocates and officers of trust housing in Newton Stewart no later than yesterday morning. And I make no apologies for reiterating here today what my comments, scathing as they were in certain aspects yesterday. The blunt fact of the matter, Chair, is that these elderly tenants, residents, call them what you will, and their families are entitled to expect a significantly better level and standard of service from Dumfries and Galloway Council as Housing and Social Work Authority, but more importantly, I would argue, from Trust Housing Association Limited than they've had thus far. To sit there yesterday and listen to the concerns and watch the apprehension on the faces of these people, as far as I'm concerned, was not only unpalatable, it was unacceptable. And I agree entirely with Graham. The first thing we should be agreeing today is that we should be making up the deficit funding, as it were, in relation to the trust are going to be incurring in relation to this financial year. But I think, you know, there's another route down which to go in relation to the future involvement of the Council as Housing and Social Work Authority, working with Trust as well. Obviously, other members would want to speak on that. I, with your leave, would want to come back at the appropriate time on that, because I think we've done a lot of discussion behind the scenes. I think we're all signed up to singing from the same hymn sheet, is my understanding. But what I would say, and the wider issue, and I would like to pick up in particular on Graham's comment, and it's mentioned in the report, if we concede this today, we'll leave ourselves open at the end of the day, you know, to other organisations coming forward and asking for up ratings in the values of their contracts. Well, instead of sitting back on a reactive basis, I would suggest, Chair, that we should be becoming proactive, and we should be saying to our central commissioning unit, take the bull by the horns here and sit down with these organisations and work out just exactly what the implications are of doing this proactively. If there are other people out there who may possibly be in a similar situation to the situation that Trust find themselves in, let's address it, and let's do it, as I say, in a positive and a proactive fashion. Because, you know, I've seen you know, the concerns that were caused at that meeting yesterday. There may very well be other client groups out there, you know, who are similarly, you know, who have similar concerns, and we're not currently aware of them. That's not acceptable. So let's, as I say, deal with this today, insofar as we need to deal with it today, set in motion a train of events to ensure that we address the outstanding issues as from today's meeting, but cast the net ever wider and take the proactive approach and go and look at these other contracts through the appropriate mechanisms in the Council and say, well, right, okay, what's the financial implications going to be for this authority, as it were, of uprating the value of these? That's the only sensible and equitable way to deal with this.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I don't actually have a Trust Housing Association property in my ward, so I suppose I'm going to take a sort of step back and look at it from the wider point of view, because I don't agree with Graham when he says we look at it case by case, because actually there are significant issues that this case has actually highlighted for me, and something I simply didn't know about. And the first thing is that a contract was effectively signed in 2003. It's never been uprated since then, and is that really how we handle grants when it comes to housing support? I mean, I think if it is, I think that's wrong, and I think, you know, we need to take a look at that around the whole commissioning process. So it does have implications for other grants. We hand out about £4 million worth of grants, and I think we'll have to look at that whole process and not just look at this in an isolated case. I think I agree entirely with what Alistair and Graham says in terms of the deficit funding. I think we have to do that. I think we're in a position whereby, and John's mentioned that in September 2012 a report came before this committee. I wasn't a member then, but the report came before this committee, and in that report you agreed to undertake a review, and I've never actually seen the outcome of that review, so we're kind of the same position we were back in September, and whatever that review concluded, I don't know, and I think that's unfortunate, and we really should have had that information before us. The only conclusion John seems to indicate was made is that social work decided they weren't a part of it. Well, the reality is social work need to be a part of this, because actually the people in these properties receive a lot of social work services, and there are major implications for the social work budget and social work services if they walk away from the process. So, I mean, I think we do need to provide the deficit funding, and I think we need to basically get round the table with Trust Housing and actually thrash out a contract that delivers services for the tenants, that first of all is the services the tenants are looking for, and secondly, it's the services that we want as a council. Because it seems at the moment that what we're kind of in a position is to hand them £199,000, and they'll decide what services they're going to provide. Now, actually, we're the ones providing the funding, so we should be deciding what services we want to be provided, and that needs to be done in discussion with the tenants themselves. I mean, as I say, I don't have a property in my ward, but I've been copied in various correspondence, and one of the issues that's coming across from tenants is that they've got a lot of unanswered questions, and they don't seem to be involved in discussions over what services need to be provided. Trust appear to be dictating that this is what they'll provide, and I don't think that's the way we should be going about business. We need to be getting round the table with Trust and actually thrashing out this contract with them and making sure that the services that are being provided are the ones that we actually want to see provided. It may very well mean that there's a change in the £199,000 contract. It may be higher, it may be the same contract, but, you know, let's actually discuss what services we're getting. That may be that I'm misinterpreting how we go about these, but that's certainly my interpretation of the information I've got in front of me. Just as an aside, what I'd be helpful for is a bit of clarification on the actual value of the payments to Trust, because I'm looking at the housing budget for the year ahead, and it appears to suggest that we pay Trust £209,000 according to the budget and according to the ABB book, but what we're saying in this report today is 199,000. So it'd be helpful to get clarification on how much we actually pay these organisations. And then turning to the wider point, the fact that we pay organisations around £4 million for house and support services, when are we actually going to review these contracts? I mean, I think 4 of them have been commissioned, but there are still dozens out there. And I think as members, we really need to have in front of us a detailed timetable as to when these various contracts and commissions are going to be reviewed, and so we can give a sort of steer and what the process will actually be, you know, in terms of who decides what services we're actually getting for our funding. I don't actually know at this stage the detailed timetable when that's going to happen. I think that would be helpful to have that information in front of us. We've got some massive budget decisions to be made over the next few years, and if we're saying that actually we've got a pile of contracts out there that were signed in 2003 when there was a significant amount of money around, I suspect, then frankly reviewing some of these contracts is something this council is going to have to do from a financial point of view as well as from a best value point of view.
Thanks for that. I can certainly reiterate the feeling of the residents, and the residents' advocates yesterday was that the Trust were just deciding what changes they were going to make, and they had absolutely no consultation with the residents as well, which I feel is totally unacceptable. The residents are there, and in some cases are paying some of their own money. They are customers. They deserve to actually have a voice, and if there's going to be a change in the service, they certainly deserve to have a voice in what those changes are going to may look like. Mr. O'Neill wants to come in on that one.
Yep, thanks, Chair. It was just a point of clarity about the contracts not being uprated since 2003. That, in fact, is a council-wide position and not a strategic housing position. And that's reflected in the advice provided by the Head of Finance in 3.6 and 3.7 of the report. And we have followed the Council's decisions in relation to these matters rather than adopting a view that's unique to this particular committee or the services that we deliver. In terms of the way forward, in terms of the review of contracts, we took a report to this committee on the 17th of January 2012, and that resulted in the first phase of homeless accommodation with support being reviewed and recommissioned, and that has now happened. And what members agreed at that time was that once that had happened, we would learn the lessons from that process and report it back to committee. So our current intention is to bring a report back to March committee, seeking members' support for the next phase of strategic recommissioning and looking for agreement for the timetable to deliver that. So March is when we intend to come back with the lessons learned in the next phase.
You want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the very point I was making, that this has implications right across the council. It's the same with, for what I can gather, social work contracts as well, that these haven't been uprated in a period of time. And maybe it suggests that actually when the contracts were handed out in 2003, we were paying far too much, that not a lot of people have been banging on our door, or maybe they've just realised what the financial implications are. But it was massive implications. I mean, Graham says, you know, it doesn't actually have a knock-on effect and we won't have people queuing at the door. I suspect we probably will have people asking similar questions to what Trust are doing if we don't actually get a grip of this whole commissioning process. Can I just ask, though, when it does come to the report that comes before us in March, it contains as much detail as possible what the actual process we go through to determine what services we want for each of these contracts. And we're absolutely clear. I was a member of the committee in January 2012, so I don't know what the paper said in terms of the 4 commissions that were signed at that time, but I think it would be really helpful to be absolutely clear exactly how we go through the process, because my take on it at the moment is that the process we've got with Trust Housing is that we pay them a big wad of money and they decide, and I don't think that's the way in which the commissioning process should be working.
You wish to come back on that, Mr. O'Neill?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in terms of the process that we adopted with the first phase of strategic commissions, members get actually very detailed appendices that describe the methodology and the way forward, and that was all brought in front of members for decision. So when we come back in March, it will actually be a very detailed report, and it's just to confirm that to Councillor.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, with all the comments that have been before us, I completely agree. Having been through the report, I think there's no doubt in my mind that we have to pay this 41,000 deficit funding. But my bigger concern on that is the future funding to the trust. I mean, that deficit funding, as we paid last year, was just to get them through this financial year ending on the 31st of March. That is not so very far away, and in a very few months the trust will be in a similar position again as they move forward in the next few financial years. So the operated contract that we've been talking about and the sum that's been put to us of 47,000 a year, we seriously have to consider in awarding that. However we decide to do it, as it's been mentioned through Head of Finance, and whether we work with social workers, work services, and sit down with the council and with trust to possibly find better ways of negotiating and delivering that contract that they have to the residents. But on a first beat, there's no doubt in my mind that we must supply this deficit funding for them. But my bigger concern is the way forward with the Trust Housing Association. When you read if anybody has read the report put in on regarding social return on investment, it's obvious through that report that trust housing and sheltered accommodation throughout provides a very, very good return for the money invested within these organisations. And as we work through the report as well, and what I do have concern with as well for another point on the agenda that we will be coming to in this committee today, is that whilst if we do not fund trust housing at the moment, warden services will be cut. They've stated that in this report. As Councillor Foster has said, the 7 days a week and the night wardens and such, the service that trust provides would have to be cut on that process. Another report coming to us today in this committee is actually to request funding to provide a warden for a different housing association. So we are being asked in one hand that if we take this money away, a service that is already there, being provided, the substructure, the housing, etc. is there, the residents are in position and have been for some time and being looked after and cared for, hopefully correctly. But from everything I've been hearing, that the residents are more than happy and would like this service to be continued. And if we put ourselves in a position where we take that service away from them and then in a further report we actually supply that service to another housing provider, I think we're putting ourselves in a very precarious situation. And so I certainly am fully supportive of awarding the deficit funding to help the trust through this financial year. But I'm more concerned about the future of the trust and the way forward, and we have to find a way to fund this and to keep the service provided for these residents. Because this service is provided throughout Dumfries and Galloway. It's not in an isolated area. We have the different areas in the report where the sheltered accommodation is provided, and it is across the whole of the region. So we must look at a way to support this.
Councillor Carruthers?
Right. Thanks very much. I think I'll keep it simple and straight to the point. I agree with recommendation 2.1. We should support it. Fully agree that 2.2 we should put that extra 41k in to retain the service. And I pick up on Colin's point, I think in particular, and we should be looking at this through the budget process we go forward over the next year. Would it be possible to get a seminar in regards to this? This is £4.5 million worth of commissions in here. Would it be possible to maybe get a seminar of some kind to get a clear understanding? Because there is a lot of I would have a lot of questions certainly to get asked to try and get underneath it, so I know that I'm making fully informed and proper decisions.
You want?
Thanks, Chair. As you've been advised previously, the intention was to bring a report to March's Housing Subcommittee with the next stage of the commissioning. We wouldn't want to hold up that process to accommodate a seminar, but if members wished strongly to have a seminar in advance of that committee, we could organise, or see if we can organise something, but it would have to be in very short order in order to knock the committee timetable off. The information and the detail will be in the report to March's Housing Subcommittee, and there'll be an opportunity for members to ask and to interrogate and to consider through that process.
Okay, sure. I mean, if that's the case, and I still feel I've got lack of information after that committee, maybe thereafter, but fine with that.
Councillor Lever?
Thank you, Chair. seem to remember a few years ago we had a similar sort of problem with Parkhead Court, where Trust Housing decided it was going to remove some services without full consultation with the tenants and was effectively bounced into this. And, you know, you talk about lessons learned. We didn't learn anything from that, and I think Trust Housing didn't either. I fully agree that we should fund the deficit, but also look forward as to how we continue the service in the future and what services we continue. And I was astonished when Jim said that social work had decided they didn't want to take any part in this review, and this was a matter for strategic housing services. I don't see how they can make that decision, given that obviously it is going to put additional pressure on their budget. So all we're doing, effectively, if we go down that line, is we're shifting money from one pocket of the council to another pocket of the council, which is still totally futile. So I do think we need a full review of all these commissions, and a holistic review across all of the commissions. And what we need to see is what the residents of places like Parkhead Court want from the service which they're being offered. In a lot of the cases, it does come down to the security of actually being in there and ensuring that if there is problems, that they are sorted at the time, rather than putting additional costs on social work and the health service if this doesn't happen. So, I don't think we can treat this and a bit by bit review. It has to be a holistic review over all the services which were offered.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, it's just a point of clarity. Social work services did in fact participate in the review, but the reason that the option contained within the report is the way it is because as a result of that process, a range of other options were ruled out, and at that point they said that they weren't in a position to offer anything in terms of future service delivery and referred it back to strategic housing for consideration. So they did participate, but it didn't result in change to services.
You want to come back into that, Councillor Lever?
Well, I'm quite interested to see that review, given that it was commissioned effectively by this.
Councillor Dempster?
Hey, thanks,
Sorry.
thanks, Chair. I think the important thing is to put the minds at rest of the people that are living in these establishments. And I think we've obviously, or at least it appears to me, we've obviously all agreed that we will deficit fund this year, which resolves the immediate issue. And I think we need to arrive at a conclusion of what the service provision might be going forward in the future. And I hope that would be done at an early date, and I would hope that would be with consultation and agreement of the service users is important. And whether we play ping pong between social work, housing services or policy, it doesn't really matter as long as the matter's resolved, because we will clearly have deeply concerned individuals until we put this matter completely to rest. And I hope that's very early. And I hope as well that when we're doing that, we look at all service providers and all service provision. There is another establishment, my ward, that's already changed from shelter to retirement home, and I know officers of the council are working with this organisation, so it's no unique that Trust Housing find themselves in the position they're in. I think what's important for us is to get it resolved and that the public know exactly where we are and that we fully support the continuing services for them, and as much as we can, we should do as early as we can.
Councillor Collins?
Thanks, Chair. I'm certainly quite content at the consensus that's across the membership here this morning, but I would just seek some clarification around the statement regarding social work and their determination to take no further part, and whether it was social work committee that made that decision. Just that piece of clarity. I would also suggest, however, in agreeing with everything that's been said thus far, that we might make a recommendation to P&R for consideration around the way that contracts are assessed and overseen on the council as a matter of policy.
You wish to answer the question regarding the social work?
Yep, Chair. The decision, as far as I understand it, was as a result of a meeting with Trust Housing Association that involved colleagues from social work and NHS. And the outcome of that meeting was that it should be emphasised that there was clear recognition that responsibility for the contracts with Trust Housing Association sit with strategic housing, and therefore ultimately any renegotiations sit firmly with strategic housing.
I'm grateful for that clarification, but I wanted to know what member involvement was there was within that decision, and there was none by all accounts.
That's a minute of a meeting at officer level within the council and Trust Housing Association.
Councillor Geddes.
Aye, and I think the important point is that Mr O'Neill has made clear, sir, that it's at officer level. If you go to the letter that Bob McDougall, the Chief Executive Officer of Trust, sent to Marion Deeney, who's a Policy Officer in Independent Living, Housing Options and Support at the Scottish Government, and the second page of that, interesting sentence, the Council recognised that any reduction in service delivered by Trust would mean that individual care packages would need to be reviewed, resulting in increased pressure on the social work services budget. Now, I think everyone round the table here today would say that's exactly what's likely to happen. You know, so that strengthens the case even more for joined up working. But the blunt fact of the matter, Chair, without being disrespectful to our officials, is that the buck stops, it's the 47 members of this authority that run the authority, and the buck stops with us. And I have no compunction in making it clear that, you know, you will be there and the Chair of Social Work will be there as part of the ongoing processes we've already indicated, together with advocates from the tenants, you know, with a view to driving this matter forward within, insofar as relating to Trust Housing Association Limited. I agree entirely with colleagues who have already said we've got to take a much wider view and in relation to the various other contracts which have never been reviewed since 2003. But in relation to this, which is the subject of the report before us today, you know, we will lay down the parameters, we will lay down the remit, we will lay down the mechanism for getting this discharged and resolved. And I would like to think we will do so within a finite timescale as soon as possible in the next financial year, on the back of what we're agreeing to do today with the deficit funding.
Councillor Smith.
Can I just ask that the report's going to come in March, where does this particular contract fit into the timetable for commissioning? When would we normally be reviewing this particular contract? When does that come up for review? Is it the forthcoming financial year, the following year? It'd be helpful to know that. I mean, just the minute of 2012 meeting said that a service review will be undertaken by Strategic Housing Services, partnership with Social Work, NHS, etc., to ensure that services delivered by Trust Housing Association meet locally assessed housing needs of older people and are financially sustainable. And the second part of that says the findings of the service review will be the subject of a future report to this subcommittee. So is the report we've got in front of us that report? And if not, when will we actually get a report of what that review said? And because basically what you're recommending here is that the existing contract continues at the current level. So to what extent did we actually carry out a review that covered the fact that it said that it had to meet locally assessed housing needs of older people and are financially sustainable? Is that what we've got in front of us? And if not, will we get that actual report?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That is in fact what members have in front of them, and a number of options were discussed at officer level as part of the review process and were rolled out in discussion with colleagues in NHS and social work, leaving that option on the table.
Just come back on that. So effectively the only option is to say we continue to pay, well, the only option we've got here, it depends what members decide, is to pay it at the current contract. But just in terms of the actual services, because as I say, I don't have a trust property in my ward, but I have been copied in emails. Residents have said, for example, we wouldn't mind if there was a change in X service, but we're concerned during removing Y service. So there does seem to be sort of potential for movement there, but we seem not to actually have a recommendation that proposes any change in services apart from what Trust are telling us they're going to do if they don't get the full amount of money. I mean, surely we should be sitting down, tenants, Trust, and actually saying, we've got financial pressures. We might not be able to provide the full, I think it'll be about £246,000 if you uprate it to 47 plus 199. We might not be able to provide the full amount, so you might want to remove that service, but the ones that the tenants actually believe are really important, we can retain them within it. I mean, that's the sort of discussion I think needs to probably happen, instead of just simply saying we'll only pay the same amount and Trust will tell us what they're going to provide for that money.
You wish to come in there, Mr O'Neill?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The option that members have in front of them is the preferred option to take back to members following discussions between ourselves and Trust Housing Association, though it is absolutely possible, as Councillor Smith is describing, to develop alternative options, part of further discussions. That would be possible. But in terms of engagement with tenants that live in the accommodation, that's a landlord responsibility, And as far as we were aware, Trust Housing Association were having discussions with their tenants and residents.
I would certainly say from the residents in Newton Stewart yesterday, that would not appear to be the case, and I believe that same would be in Stranraer. I'm looking at Councillor Foster there. I don't believe that Trust actually asked the residents what they thought of the changes.
They were consulted, but I don't know whether they were asked what they wanted. There's a difference. But Chair, if I could just come in, there's a lot of residents from the Trust here today. From what I'm hearing, were minded to pay this money to make up the shortfall from last year. From what Bob McDougall told me in Stranraer on Monday, they will carry on the status quo as far as service delivery is concerned until May. Now, if he gets this £41,607 today, presumably he'll carry on beyond May until such times as we as a council speak to him and negotiate a service level contract. So I'm looking at it from the residents' point of view. I mean, Bob's made it quite plain. They need 47.6k for the status quo to remain throughout the whole of next year. If I were a resident in Trust Housing, I know the service I'm getting now will last to May. By us approving the 41,000 today, and what I'm hearing is that the status quo will remain, and in the meantime, we will go and investigate the whole issue of the Trust Housing contract. It will come back to us, and a future decision will be taken to make up any shortfall if the committee so decides. Is that correct? Where exactly are we? Because I can't speak for the residents, but I can speak for myself, and I'm getting a bit confused here now. And I'm looking at it. I mean, we've heard the machinations of the council and arm's length companies and what will come out of the woodwork if we approve it. But if I were a tenant of Trust House today, I would like to know what's going to happen in the future.
I would certainly think that they would like to know that as well. However, you mentioned your meeting with Mr McDougall. I actually have the same minutes that Mr McNeill says, and in those minutes it says that the changes will take effect from the 1st of April. So I don't know. While I was speaking to you there was a couple of members put their hands up that I didn't actually catch. Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Chair. Move my card. I agree with I think Graham summed it up really well there in regards to what we do, how do we go forward. I'm happy enough content if in regards to certainly what I proposed earlier, it was just in support of what other people had already proposed. We do agree to maintain the 199,635. We do put an extra 41,607. We need some security in regards to how that goes forward. But I think there's a really lengthy debate in regards to future provision, not just for Trust, but across all the commissions we have to look at. And that's why I asked for that seminar in particular. And March is probably the better date to come back and start that rather than here. I think this is about securing for the sake of the services that the tenants are looking for. They want that security. I think we should lay that to bed, make sure they've got that security, pick it up as soon as we can. If that's in March, then at that point we can look at and make a properly, fully informed, considered decision.
Yeah, I don't disagree that we need to look at all the contracts, but at the minute we're dealing with this one. I think we make a decision what we're going to do with this one, and then we can look at all the other contracts that's in. Councillor Geddes. You motioned that you want it back in to speak?
Yes, with your leave. You know, I think we've got to be careful though, Chair, because, you know, we have a locus and we have a role in this, but we cannot, you know, stand in the stead of Trust Housing Association in relation to their tenants. And that's why we'll go back to the point that Colin Smith, Councillor Smith has already made. You know, we must negotiate with Trust Housing Association Limited. But at the end of the day, we've got to accept that there is a relationship between them and their tenants. Because you'll recollect that no later than yesterday, certainly the tenants in Newton Stewart were asking if the council had carried out a risk assessment, and my response to that was, with the greatest of respect, that's not the council's role and function. That was a risk assessment in relation to, that had to be carried out by Trust in relation to their proposals for an amended service. And I think we've got to clarify precisely the situation here. You know, we, while we're all, I would imagine, certainly in my case, keen to adopt a can-do attitude and to get the best deal we possibly can, and to remove the concerns and apprehensions from the tenants and the elderly residents. At the end of the day, our negotiating has got to take place with trust. But as Colin's already said, we spell out clearly and unequivocally what we as a strategic housing and a social work authority expect and demand for the money that we are giving them. And if we don't get that, we really bring the hammer down. And I think that shouldn't be lost sight of, Chairman.
Just before I bring any other members in there, as you said at the meeting yesterday, we were asked if the council had made a risk assessment, and you quite rightly said, well, if the trust change, it's up to them to carry out the risk assessment. I see in under point 5, it says the trust have carried out a risk assessment. I believe that there's at least some of the residents may think that the trust actually haven't carried that out. Where have we got the information that the trust has carried out the risk assessment?
Thanks.
Sorry,
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The members of the public aren't allowed to speak, but I believe that there are some residents and possibly relatives of residents believe that the trust may not have carried out a risk assessment. I'm sorry I can't allow you to speak. I really would, but I'm trying to find out on your behalf where we've got the information that the trust have actually carried out the risk assessment.
Thanks, Chair. We got that information from Trust Housing Association.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Dempster, then Foster, and then Councillor Smith again.
Thanks, Chair. We now seem to be dancing round in circles, and I think we should maybe get to the meat of the matter. I think we should agree to deficit fund, and I think that by all members' account that they're all in unison with that, so that's not an issue. We've been told by Jim verbally that we would get a report in March. That would be before the deadline for the services to cease, and I think that would be adequate. We may have the capacity to extend that for a few weeks into May if, for whatever reason, that was deemed a necessity, but I think it's important that members get this report back at the very earliest date so that we can make a decision and still remain within the parameters that the finance officer is talking about. I think that's important. But I think we need to set out timelines now and deal with the matter in hand, because we've all been round, and it's important to the residents that they get closure, whatever that closure may be. They need to know, and they need to know going forward where exactly they stand and how we as a council are going to deal with their needs and their requirements over the long term. But I would suggest, Chair, that we get this now drilled down to where we're going, what the direction is and how soon we do it.
I can't argue with that. However, I'll ask Mr Lynch to clarify, but my understanding was the report that's coming in March is about the tendering for other services, it'll not include anything in this one. I'll just ask Mr Lynch just if my understanding is correct.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The report that we're planning for March Housing Sub is to do with the commissioning of the rest of the housing support services. If members require a further report in relation to trust, you will need to give us some direction today about what that report needs to include and how we're going to take the matter forward. If you don't give us that direction, we can't bring a report forward, and certainly March is an unrealistic timetable to bring a report back in relation to the trust contract. The March report will look at the recommissioning process across the whole of the housing support contracts. So we need some specific decisions in relation to the trust contract today by members. Thanks.
You want to come back in on that, Councillor Dempster?
Please, Chair. Whilst that's important, there's obviously a key issue here with trust housing. So we need to deal with that at the earliest opportunity. So I suppose the question then to John and Jim is, how soon can we get that report back? How soon, or do we have the capacity to fund between the 1st of April and whatever time that date is, because that's into another financial year? Would Trust agree to that? And there are a number of questions contained within that I'm sure officers would want to pose to them. But the key issue is, how soon can we get the report back to allow us to decide on the long-term future of the residents that are clearly concerned about their personal circumstances? That is a key issue for today, because that's what the report in front of us is addressing today. And I think we should hear from John and Jim how soon we can get that comprehensive report back and how we address the issues if it goes beyond the end of this financial year.
Mr O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, my understanding from the discussions that have taken place this morning is that there's a willingness from members of this subcommittee to be involved in further discussions with Trust Housing Association. So to some degree, that will dictate the timetable for bringing a report back. But in terms of the decision-making process, I think the point that Alistair Geddes, or Councillor Geddes made, was very important. Trust Housing Association are an independent organisation, and they are able, and as they've shown us already, they're able to make their own decisions in response to anything that we may bring forward or wish to discuss with them. So I would recommend that funding is put in place, at least in the short term, to allow those discussions to take place, and then a report is brought back with bringing the outcome of those discussions back to this committee for further consideration, because we don't want to create a risk that Trust Housing Association could walk away from the negotiating table, and the best way to do that is to ensure that the current level of services are provided on an ongoing basis until those discussions are concluded.
Councillor Foster, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to simplify the whole issue, I agree entirely with what Jim said. I mean, within the report here, it's quite simple. Assuming we're paying the deficit from last year, to retain the status quo, in other words, what's provided at present by Trust Housing, they're looking for another £47,639. Well, in my books and in simple arithmetic, that's 48,000, which is 4,000 a month. If this council agrees today to underwrite or to pay Trust Housing £4,000 a month until such times as a complete review is determined, that lets them carry on. It takes the heat off the residents. And if it takes the council 6 months, it's cost us 24,000. If we get our finger out and act efficiently and get a new service, it might cost us less. But we agree to pay £4,000 per month to Trust Housing to maintain the status quo in the meantime from the 1st of April.
I understand the sentiments, however, I have some worry about just giving an open decision of paying £4,000 a month. I hear what you're saying about the council and members of this, or myself in particular, getting my finger out and getting the meeting arranged and all the rest of it, but there's another agency involved here that we would have to say the same to, and just giving them a blank cheque of spending £4,000 a month, I'm not willing to do. I'm more inclined to think that we should be giving them 3 or 4 months to actually sit down with us, and including the advocates or the residents in there, to try and find a solution to this, and that being brought back to this committee probably in July, which gives them 3 or 4 months, and we will tell them we will continue the funding for 6 months, which would take it up to September. That way, if there were to be any changes, they can then implement them between the time of the committee and the ending of the extra funding. That's certainly the way I feel. I'll leave it up to members to decide if they are happy with that one. Councillor Smith, you want it back in?
I agree entirely with that. I mean, I wouldn't simply say we'll pay them £4,000 a month until they get round to agreeing with us the way forward. I think we have to set timelines on this. I think July is a reasonable time, unless officers tell us otherwise. And we should be making the payments up to September to allow any changes to then be implemented. I think is a perfectly reasonable way forward. So I'd be quite happy to second that if you're moving that as a motion, Chair. I think that's a reasonable way forward. I'll come back to my earlier point, though, about where does the Trust Housing Association's current contract fit into the timetable for commissioning. So the report we get in March, where will it actually say the Trust Housing contract is going to be recommissioned? Is it next year, the year after, the year after that?
Mr. O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. That information will be contained within the report, but I think it's probably appropriate to advise members at this point in time, in terms of commissioning sheltered housing projects, by their very nature, they're accommodation-based support services, and the support delivered is inextricably linked to the accommodation. So the report is likely to say that what's required in relation to sheltered accommodation are negotiations with each landlord about individual schemes, It's not possible to subject sheltered housing schemes to competitive tender because the accommodation and support are one and the same.
So it would be helpful either in the report or at some point, a seminar or otherwise, therefore to tell me exactly, and members exactly how those contracts are actually agreed, who in terms of the actual figure, because as things stand at the moment, the figure seems to be set by Trust Housing rather than ourselves, or it's just backdated to 2003. So I'm curious as to how we actually thrash out the exact amount we pay these organisations.
Thanks, Chair. The Council inherited the contracts from the then Scottish Executive in 2003, and the value of the contracts were determined externally by the Department of Work and Pensions, and that's the situation that's remained since 2003. What the recommissioning process would recommend is renegotiating these contracts and re-looking and re-examining the services that are delivered and the financial value of the contracts. But in relation to sheltered housing contracts, that will involve the type of process that we're discussing today, sitting down with individual organisations, because you can't tender accommodation-based schemes, because the accommodation and support are inextricably linked. So it's a negotiating process.
So the timetable for those negotiations for all these services will be contained in the report in March?
Yes, I'll come to Councillor Smith, sorry. The timetable will be contained within the report, and obviously if members have a different view about the timetable contained within the report, then they can let us know that at the committee.
Councillor Dempster.
Just briefly, Chair, I presume, and quite rightly, that this is the primary concern today, but then there'll be a second phase as well that we'll be looking at provision from all other external providers throughout the region, because already we've lost services in one property in my ward, and I know that's unique and it's been dealt with, but just to be sure that other providers know that they too will be given the same opportunity in the next phase. And I suppose we could be given an indication in the report in March when discussions with other providers might commence, when we've dealt with the primary issue, which is a trust housing issue, and the needs of their tenants.
Mr O'Neill.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to confirm to Councillor Dempster that what the report is likely to say is to deal with the review process and recommissioning process by sector. So it's likely to recommend a timetable for looking at the whole sheltered housing sector. The reason we're discussing this one in advance of that process is because of the decisions taken by Trust Housing Associations Board, and that's kind of ultimately out with their control.
Councillor Lever.
I think as part of the discussions and negotiations, we do need to ensure that the needs and desires of the residents are taken into account by the provider, and they don't assume that what they provide in the past is what's needed in the future.
If members are no more... Councillor Carruthers.
Just a very brief one, because we picked up in the seminar for everyone, but just statutory and non-statutory as well. We have to be absolutely clear what we're statutory obliged to provide and what we're not.
Thanks for that. If we can turn to the recommendations, I think we'll go to 2.2 first. I think we're all in agreement that we are agreed that when we make the single payment of 41,607 for the full operating costs for 2013-14. It's regarding recommendation 2.1. I think I'm right in saying that we're agreeing at the minute to maintain the contract value at 199,635, but that we want high-level meetings involving the Trust, NHS, social work, housing, the chairs of social work and housing, and in my view, even more importantly, advocates for the residents of the home to be involved in a meeting or meetings to agree a solution, which will then report back, and as I suggested, the July committee meeting for consideration of the options. And with that in mind, that we will continue to fund the deficit for 14-15 up until September. Councillor Smith.
Just to be clear, it's not just the 199,000, it's the 199,000 plus the monthly uplift, if you like, in order to deal with the deficit. So it's the proportion of the 47,000, 4,000 a month, I think is what Graham said, basically, I think. Just.
Yeah, sorry, if I wasn't clear, that we would fund the deficit over and above the 199,000 up until September, because we're getting the report back in July for the final considerations. Councillor Dempster, then Councillor Geddes.
The advocates for the tenants that you talk about, I think there are 6 different properties involved, and it might be better to have someone representing all of them, because if no, you will find out you've got a committee that's larger than this, trying to deal with a serious matter. And it is serious that the residents are represented, but I presume that the general needs and demands will just be the same no matter which unit it is.
Yeah, I can see your point. The more people you put on a meeting, the longer it takes to actually come to a decision. But yes, there are 6 premises, but we have 3 different types of residents. I would suggest that possibly advocates, more than one advocate, covering the 6, because you've got 6 different premises, and the problems you may have in either Langham or Thornhill could be different from what you get in either Newton Stewart, Glenluce or Stranraer. I would suggest that we would need more than one advocate for the residents. Councillor Dempster?
Wouldn't want to labour it, Chair, but it may be then that members of the committee meet with the residents and then take their views to the committee. I'm just trying to simplify matters, because I can just imagine that it will become a complex process as it is, but it's important that their views are somehow presented, and if there are 3 different disciplines, then there should be 3 different levels of debate in relation to that.
Councillor Geddes?
Chair, we had the privilege, and I use the term advisedly, of listening to a particular advocate yesterday in Newton Stewart on behalf of tenants. And I've no doubt that there's probably people of equal articulacy, and cerebral capacity advocating on behalf of the tenants and the other developments. I think we should offer them the facility, in fact, to have an advocate from all 6 of the developments. I know, as I said yesterday, you don't want the world and his wife there because, as you said, it can slot the decision-making process. But I think, given the importance of this and the legitimate complaints that we heard yesterday about lack of feedback and lack of what the tenants and their advocates felt on occasions was genuine consultation, it's imperative that we make that provision available if they wish to avail themselves of it. That's the point. That was really the point I wanted to raise, sir. Forgive the semantics, but agree to maintain the current contract value of 199,635. Can I ask, sir, that you put in the word pending there, pending? And I have no quibbles and difficulties with what you went on to say about how we would take this forward.
I'm happy to add the word pending in between the 19635 and what I stated earlier on. I would tend to agree that we give the advocates from each of the developments the opportunity to attend. If an advocate from a particular one doesn't want to turn up, that's for them. I think we give each establishment the opportunity to send one advocate to the meetings, if members are content with that. Councillor Colours?
Do we need to identify where the budget's coming through for the extra 6 months or not? Is that within funds that are actually available?
Mr Lynch?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the deficit funding for 13-14, we can accommodate that within existing budgets. The proposal for 14-15 would be an additional call on the second home's income, which we can accommodate, and we've got an in-principle agreement that you made in September last year to use some of that funding for these purposes. So we can certainly assure members that the funding is available in the terms that you've set out in your recommendations.
Do members wish a summary of what we've actually agreed to at 2.1, or are we content that we all understand it? Councillor Peacock?
Chair, it may be worth just a brief and simple summary for the benefit of the residents sitting here, because it was quite a protracted recommendation there. So just a very basic sum up so the residents are quite clear within themselves before they leave this room just where they are.
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy to explain to the public rather than the officer what the members have agreed to. If members are happy for me to do that in plain English. Plain English, we've agreed to keep the current contract at the value where it is. We have agreed that we will fund the shortfall for this financial year up until the end of March 2014. And we have agreed that there will be a high-level meeting involving the Trust, social work, NHS, and the Chair of Social Work and the Chair of Housing, which will be me, and most importantly, advocates for each one of the 6 establishments to agree a solution and report back to this committee in July this year, and the funding for 14-15, we have agreed that we will pay up in the extra funding over and above the 199,000 will be paid up until September. Our members of the public understand that. Thanks very much. For ease for the committee and for our next speaker who's going to be doing a presentation, I would propose that we adjourn for 10 minutes to allow members of the public to clear and the speaker to actually get ready to his presentation. If we are back here at 11:45. Obviously, if members of the public want to stay to hear the presentations and the further debates, and they are quite welcome to stay. And Mr. Bookbinder to get ready for his presentation. I'll move on to item 3. It's a presentation on the current housing policy in Scotland, and it's being presented by Mr. Bookbinder.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for inviting the Chartered Institute of Housing in Scotland to come down and speak. Really, really welcome this opportunity. It's a bit of an understatement to say this is a whistle-stop tour through housing policy, or a selection, if you like, of current housing policy issues, challenges in Scotland. I've tried to tailor this presentation to the fact that obviously you're a strategic housing authority rather than a landlord, although obviously it doesn't mean to say that landlord interests are not also of interest to you. One of the things we're getting asked to do a lot is comment on the referendum, and in some ways we could easily say, well, there's nothing to comment on. Housing's already devolved. Why would any of the housing sector have an interest either way in the referendum? And I think clearly, in terms of pure devolved housing policy, then the referendum may not make a difference either way. But in terms of the broader picture of investment and the potential public investment implications of either outcome of the referendum, and needless to say, CIH Scotland is obviously not aligned in any way, either politically or in terms of yes and no. But some of the issues that we've thought through, which I'm sure you have, that would affect the wider housing world, the wider housing market, are very much there. Whether we have any of the answers or not, and can come to an easy judgment is another question. But the whole question of what public expenditure will be, can public expenditure maintain its current levels or even go up without taxes going up? Is there going to be a willingness amongst politicians or indeed amongst the public, if there is a yes vote, to pay higher taxes, to somehow show that Scotland wants to be more altruistic, more philanthropic, and to raise more money for schools, hospitals, housing, etc. The boom and bust housing market that we're all sadly have had to get used to in recent decades, most economists say that one way of stopping that boom and bust, or at least having an impact on that boom and bust, is taxing of the profit people make from home ownership. Are politicians likely to want to go down that road? Or some have described it as the longest sort of electoral suicide note in history. If you do go down that route, not exactly popular, but is it a way, if Scotland does become independent, will it want to have a better control over the housing market than is the case at present? Obviously difficult decisions on welfare reform, because if you inherit a cut or a system, a reduced system, then there's always more difficult decisions. However much a politician might want to reverse certain things within the welfare reforms, clearly there are financial implications to that. So I think we're all aware of what some of those difficult decisions would be. Will independence, would it affect the way local authorities are funded, given that at the moment, I think roughly about 80% of local government income comes from centrally from Scottish Government, and only around 20% raised locally? Will we see any movement with either a referendum result or on changing the way local authorities are funded? that issue, the whole issue of the government, presumably, an independent Scottish government would very much want to stimulate investment and attract investment, whether it's the energy companies, if I may mention the energy companies, or private, companies, financial institutions that want to invest, for instance, in private rented housing in hotspot areas where that's needed. Clearly, under independence, any potential investor is going to look north and south and decide what suits them best, what is the more generous, the more facilitating regime for them. So huge amount of challenges there about whether we will find, as I said earlier, energy companies more or less willing to work in Scotland than they are at the moment. We often get asked, do you think there'll be a greater priority for housing investment under independence? And the quick answer to that is, it doesn't matter what political system, independence or not, politicians have to make decisions under any system about what their political priorities and funding priorities are. And so under independence or under a no vote, the battles between health and education and housing and transport will all be there just the same. I don't think independence doesn't automatically mean one thing or another in terms of the priority that housing's given. If it's a no vote, I guess there are certain associated implications of that. There's lots of talk and rumours, and it's all speculation, of course, about whether the Barnett formula would be scrapped. Some argue that Scotland does quite well by it compared with the north of England or Wales. Would there be a sort of amicable acknowledgement from the UK government that even with a no vote, there's the potential for some transfer of powers, or particularly with a big no vote, would there be a kind of, well, you've had your chance now, we'll just get on with life as normal as a UK government, and we're not going to give you any concessions to further powers? I think the jury's out on a lot of that. And if there, one of the positives that you might argue is if a no vote happens, does that mean that you put that aside, you put that, some might say, a distraction aside, and get on with looking at those issues that are already devolved, like housing, like transport, education, health, crime, etc., and just politicians, in a sense, renew their focus on those issues. So all speculation. We don't have, of course, any answers, but it's the issue of what happens to public expenditure and the housing market in particular is of great interest in terms of what the outcome might be. Talking about the referendum issues and talk of life north and south, it does bring into focus what Scotland already and has done for many, many years, done differently in terms of devolved housing policy. And I think without going into detail on any of these, it really is just a flavour. Believe you me, rents are a lot lower. Council and housing association rents in Scotland are one heck of a lot lower and more affordable than they are in England, and particularly compared with some of the hotspot areas in the southeast of England. Development subsidy, the amount of grant that those councils that are building and housing associations that are building, the amount of grant that they get, even before the recent increase. Of course, it fell dramatically, and then it's recently gone back up again. But the sort of, just ballpark figures, the average grant per new unit in Scotland is probably somewhere now around, across council and housing association, it's a higher rate for housing associations. It's probably around about 45, 50, and perhaps going up a little bit. In England, it's less than 20 per unit. So you can see why rents are obviously much higher in England. And there is a real Scottish government commitment, both with this administration and with previous administrations, to keep rents affordable through providing decent development subsidy, amongst other things. Tenants' rights, well, we could spend a lot of time looking at that. I know you don't directly have tenants, but it's interesting. As you know, there is a unified council and housing association tenancy in Scotland, and has been for 10, 12 years. There are still separate tenancies for council tenants in England, and separate tenancies for housing association tenants. I think Scotland has led the way on that since the 2001 and one act, and it feels a lot more civilised to not be a bickering between council and housing association, different types of tenancies. Homelessness, Scotland has, not everyone agrees with it, but Scotland has certainly a pioneering approach to homelessness, which means that there is a more tolerant and generous view about how to treat people coming out of homelessness. The right to buy discounts are being increased in England, and the right to buy is as I'm sure you know, proposed for abolition in the current housing bill that's just started its journey through the Scottish Parliament. So there are already huge differences, and I would say, and I've certainly worked in housing in England, my own personal view is that there's a lot that's good about what's going up here compared with some of the housing policies that we've seen in recent years down south. I'm not going to go into detail on welfare reform. Obviously, from your point of view, not a direct landlord, but huge involvement as a local authority, I am sure, in trying to help mitigate the impacts across tenants, across anyone who is affected, whatever their tenure is, by different aspects of the welfare reform. So I'm sure that you're very keen and take a big interest in the pressures on landlords and tenants, even if you don't have any tenants directly of your own. I think the big story from our point of view nationally is that whilst the bedroom tax, and I do apologise, I should have put that in inverted commas, whilst the bedroom tax or under occupation penalty gets the headlines, and for understandable reasons, all the trends appear to be showing that arrears generally are increasing, not just because of the bedroom tax. And that raises issues about the recession, about people's ability to pay rent more generally, rather than it just being an issue about the bedroom tax. The jury's out. We've got to look carefully at all the statistics we possibly can. But the impression at the moment we have is that arrears are more generally on the increase. And I'm sure your colleagues at DGHP, Lorben, etc., they'll all have their own experiences on this. That's certainly what the impression we've got. The private rented sector, because of welfare reforms, is becoming a lot less accessible. Some might argue it was never that accessible in some areas, but it has become, as a slide I've got in a moment shows, the private rented sector is really growing, for better or worse. It really is growing in Scotland. It's doubled in size. It has become one of the only options for some households in certain areas, and it's becoming a lot less accessible, especially to younger people who would be reliant for at least part of their rent on housing benefit or local housing allowance in the private rent sector. So if people can't, who used to go into the private rent sector can't, where are they going? What's happening to them? And of course, some of them, the answer is, well, they're staying at home into their 30s. And I think we saw a figure earlier this week on the average age of people staying at home is going up quite markedly. And the job that councils have as strategic bodies of both a suite of their own actions, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, and then working with the right bodies, whether it's credit unions, financial organisations, to promote people's ability to in a housing context, take in money and when they get money directly under universal credit, if universal credit ever comes, and make direct payments, of course, to the landlord. The whole digital inclusion, I'm sure, and not least as one of the pilot authorities, you don't need telling what a huge range of tasks there is there. I think the only way, from a national point of view, the only thing I could point to good news, if you like, is that I suppose that the slower timetable for universal credit perhaps gives a little more time to try and get as many things in place in terms of advice and support to people. But of course, some of the reforms are already on us. And of course, there's a question on welfare reform for those that are developing, particularly social housing, is do we start building one-bedroom flats again? Most developers have moved away from that thought. It's not a very modern way of, or not a very flexible way of making provision. But now some providers are having to say, well, should we build a modest number of one-bed properties or because of the pressures from the under-occupation penalty. Quick couple of points on housing need and supply. I think when we used to talk about what's the housing need in Scotland, and each local authority, of course, responsible for looking at housing need in its own area, we used to talk solely about social rented housing. I think there is now sensibly a broader view being taken that people who may be teachers, nurses, people who are in work, not paid the highest salaries in the world, but who may struggle to access social housing. I think there's an increasing acknowledgement that they have housing need just like anyone else. They may not have the options they used to have in terms of easy access to mortgages. Obviously, you don't need telling how difficult that's become. So that notion of mid-market rent, rent that will be somewhere between a social rent and a fully private rent, I think that's a story that's unfolding in Scotland and in hotspot areas, not everywhere, but in hotspot areas that there is a market for that kind of mid-rent provision. And we're still quite, I don't think that providers have gone very far down that road just yet. Of course, social rent is still the major priority for most or all local authorities in their strategic role. That tends to be where the greatest pressure is. And at the moment, the Scottish Government's target is 4,000 a year. There'll be differing views on whether that's enough. We would inevitably say it's not, but we do recognise that times are tough at the moment. There's no magic way of funding social housing. Sometimes we get the impression at CIH that we're just waiting for this magic pension fund or investment bond or some magic private finance sort of product to come along. As far as we're concerned, you always need grant to go along with the private finance. You will always need public grant if you want to keep rents properly affordable to people, particularly in low-paid work. So for us, we're not waiting for any silver bullet. That it's got to be just that right combination of grant and private finance. You won't need telling that some registered social landlords, housing associations, have found it more difficult to develop. Hopefully the grant rates increase that was announced last summer will help quite significantly, and that was a very positive move by the Scottish Government. In terms of the challenges you face, I mean, our national view of some of the challenges for strategic local authorities is that there's, you've had your work cut out over in terms of homelessness and the challenges that the 2012 target presented, but some really recent encouraging trends that the work that authorities like you are doing in terms of housing options and homelessness prevention are making real inroads into reducing presentations of homelessness, and that's got to be encouraging. We're aware, as I'm sure you will be more than well aware, that the Scottish housing regulators been carrying out what they call a thematic inspection of housing options and prevention of homelessness. We were expecting that report in the next week or two. We now understand it's been quite significantly delayed, and you probably know more about that than I do. I think as one of the authorities that was involved. So we will have to await the outcome of that. But some generally very encouraging trends, but not without challenges, not least in access to temporary accommodation and how long people still may be having to wait in temporary accommodation. Huge pressures there. On Tuesday this week, as far as I am aware, the Health Committee of the Scottish Parliament approved some amendments tabled by Alex Neil that potentially, and we don't know an awful lot about the background, but the public, what's it called, the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Bill, or the bill that integrates health and social care, will give ministers the power to compel a local authority to transfer to the new health and social care partnerships all of its homelessness functions and a number of strategic housing functions to the new health and social care bodies. That was as recently as Tuesday. We are all trying to absorb some of the implications of that. And again, there may be members or officers around the table who have a better grasp of that than I do. So just sorry to throw that one in if it came as a surprise. But we like to keep our presentations up to date. And that was Tuesday. obviously your role, it's odd from a national housing body point of view. It's odd to think of the fact that only relatively recently did councils get an enhanced, proper strategic role in the divvy up of development funding to either between itself if it's a developer or to housing associations. It seems odd that we ever had a situation where councils were not involved in that, given their strategic role. So that the enhanced role just seems to make absolute sense, that we now have a tripartite system between Scottish Government, local authorities and housing associations, and you kind of think it should always have been like that. I'll move on just a few more slides. I've made allusion to the changing rental sector, and the private rental sector really is much more prominent now, although I know that will vary from area to area. It's that balance that is still Scottish Government still grappling with, of trying to get proportionate regulation to make sure landlords offer a decent quality accommodation without putting people off from making accommodation available. And that notion of trying to get consumers to be more aware of their own rights so that they know what's supposed to happen to their tenancy deposit now. This is a journey that really government and others are only some way through, because at the moment I still think that there is a balance away from the tenant, who probably either doesn't know their rights or is rather too afraid in some situations to exercise them. The vast majority of private landlords are not a problem at all, although awareness of responsibilities perhaps could be improved. And in hotspot areas where private rents are really high and have rocketed, to us, there's no question of government rent control. It's just not going to happen in our view. The only way of bringing costs down is to have more supply. Now, our rhetoric question, would some housing associations who've spent most of their history providing social rent and believing that's what they're there for, would they dare to go into the private rent market if there's a demand? They're good at what they do generally. They're experienced landlords. They would probably be trusted to a degree more than some private landlords who built up a bad reputation in certain parts of Scotland. So the question there is, can housing associations be part of that increased supply, or do some of them think it's like sleeping with the devil to provide private rented accommodation? As I've said about mid-market rent, I think there's untapped demand for that in many areas, but supply really is at a fairly low level. In terms of owner-occupied housing, you don't need telling what a difficult job local authorities have got here. The 2006 Act pretty much removed grant for repairs. Obviously, there was a more favourable system of grant for adaptations, but it pretty much removed grant for repairs, but it didn't really put much else in place. So whilst you have got powers, you don't have an awful lot in the way of resources necessarily. And people often say to us, do you think private housing issues are low priority for politicians? And our answer is, well, it's probably more of a resource issue than a low priority. And I don't see a lot of change in that in the future. And of course, it impinges on social landlords because of mixed blocks, which I'm sure again you're very familiar with, where you've got owners who are facing genuine difficulty finding their share of what could be quite major works. This is going to come to a head when the Scottish Government, or if the Scottish Government goes ahead with its commitment to bring in minimum standards of energy efficiency for homeowners over the next few years. I won't go into any detail on that, but it is quite a bold political step to dare I say, interfere in the business of homeowners and say, well, at the point that you sell that property, it has to achieve a certain grade of energy efficiency, or the person buying it has got 6 months to make it achieve that grade. So there's a lot of interesting debate on that, I'm sure. Finally, I couldn't not have a slide on the challenges of our ageing population. I think I get the sense as a housing body that there is an even greater priority given or profile now of the importance of adaptations across all housing sectors and tenures. I think when we talk as a housing sector to health and social care agencies to get the message across about the contribution housing can make, adaptations tends to come pretty high, pretty near the top of the list. And the Scottish Government's doing quite a lot of work to try and streamline the system. As you know, funding for adaptations is different depending on which tenure you're in, whether you're a homeowner or a council tenant or a housing association tenant, and that's quite messy. And it shouldn't be. Really, you should get the adaptation you need if you're a priority, regardless of what tenure you're in. So it is a messy system. Lots of good practice going on, but it's a very inconsistent system, and the Scottish Government's trying to streamline that a little bit while still allowing for local variation. Two issues just to finish with. Are we building enough housing to wheelchair standard? Most disabled people do not use wheelchairs, but we've actually seen a drop in the proportion of what we're building that's accessible to people who do need to use a wheelchair some or all of the time. And that, again, given what's happening with the ageing population, is that a mistake that we're making in terms of what's getting developed? And we're putting a lot of pressure on Scottish Government to make sure that there is a certain amount, a quota, if you like, of supply of wheelchair housing. And the specialist provision in terms of potentially building schemes that are go a lot further than sheltered housing, that would be some kind of housing with care scheme that is effectively could be a replacement to the more traditional types of residential care, but where people have still got their own sort of front door within a scheme. That doesn't come cheap, and that needs contributions from housing, from health, from social care, and there's very little of it happening at the moment, and that's a real challenge as we go forward. We know most older people will always live at home, in their own home, but there's always going to be a small percentage of older people who need something else, something specialist, and if that's not going to be traditional residential care, what are we building to replace that? So there we go. Hope that's not too grim. Just a whistle-stop tour. There'll be loads of issues probably on your mind that I've not mentioned. Feel free to fire questions in what time we have.
I'll open it up to questions to Mr Bookbinder or to Mr Lynch as it relates to our local council. Councillor Carrs?
Just clarity, I suppose, on the wheelchair standard, and I suppose what I would have took that as being DDA compliant, but I suppose it's two different things. If you could just tell me what that is.
No, it's a good point. What I think 10, 12, even 15 years ago, most new council and housing association property had to be built to what I think Scottish Homes labelled a housing for varying needs standard, and that was for a standard for all homes, and that was a step forward, but it didn't cover, or there was an enhanced version of that, as you rightly say, that covered wheelchair housing. I think what's happened, we're making most of the housing that we build more generally accessible, but we've actually left the enhanced standard, let that fall off the agenda a little bit, because that goes beyond the normal sort of flexible standard.
Are we talking about chair lift, stair lifts, stuff like that? Is that the difference? That's what I'm trying to, because all houses any house that's built has to comply with the DDA, accessible wider doors, ramps and such like, from outside getting into the house, but I think when you're talking inside the house, it may be, so you're talking stair lift, stuff like that.
Yes, so I mean, I think the housing for varying needs standards, it says that you've got to make sure that structurally a house is capable of taking a stair lift, for example. So there is that sort of flexibility built in, but there are some pretty exacting standards for wheelchair housing that even go beyond the norm, if you like. And I think, and of course, some wheelchair housing that can only be ground floor. Clearly, there are schemes that are built, particularly in urban areas, which inevitably don't have lifts and are not going to be accessible. Full stop. And that's we accept that, but it's about redressing the balance with provision elsewhere.
Councillor Lever.
In terms of the minimum standards of energy efficiency, I mean, that could have a big impact down here. You know, we've got a lot of stone-built cottages in the middle of the countryside, and look very quaint, but in terms of energy efficiency, they're absolutely hopeless. You know, they leak energy all over the place. Very, very difficult to insulate, having solid stone walls, etc. Will there be any mitigation given in terms of that, or is it just going to be a blanket level set right across the country? And while on the ageing population, is there any thought being given to provide assistance to elderly tenants to actually move out of family homes into much more appropriate homes themselves? Because there's a big reluctance to actually getting people to move out of a home where they've been there for a long time and they've got the decorated the way they wanted, etc., to persuade them to move into a home which is much more appropriate for themselves, freeing up the family home.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor, about the stone built issue, the hard to treat issue in the social sector. That's the type of property, of course, that councils and housing associations have found most difficult when they've been trying to achieve the Scottish housing quality standard that they're required to do, and there'll be an enhanced energy efficiency standard for social housing providers. The government has made no commitment at the moment to that issue as it relates to owner-occupiers, but my guess is that there would have to be either some serious financial support or exemptions. My guess is the latter when it comes to it, depending on the nation's financial state at that point. But of course, some properties are so much more difficult than others. Yeah. Oh, sorry. On the, it's interesting that the under-occupation issue, the bedroom tax has kind of taken up, because the bedroom tax is a working age thing. It's taken everyone's mind away from the fact that the greatest amount of under-occupation, of course, is amongst older people. I don't think we can do anything about. I don't think the social sector can really do much to offer homeowners who are under-occupying their own homes. But I think most councils and housing associations with stock have been, in recent years, genuinely trying to incentivise, and that's as far as they can go, of course. They don't want to compel, and can't, older homeowners to downsize, if at all possible. I think, unfortunately, some of their ability to do that and offer those kind of incentives have been swept away by the bedroom tax, because now those incentives and assistance is probably being offered to younger people, which is kind of seems all wrong, but there we go.
Councillor Dempster.
Just intrigued by your word incentivise folk to downsize. For years before the onset of bedroom tax, single persons, young middle-aged, were allocated 3-bedroom houses because they were deemed as in desperate need for the first available property. And now they find themselves in a position where they're being punished by this new introduction, this particular tax, no fault of their own. And we don't have the properties to downsize to. So I think it's maybe right that we constantly review the type of properties that are necessary in today's climate, if you like, or the circumstances. But I don't see any enthusiasm for demolishing rows and rows of 3-bedroom houses and creating one. But maybe that's what direction we should be taking.
Just to say, yes, I mean, the latest information we have is that more landlords than even 6 months ago, more developing landlords, are sometimes with a bit of reluctance starting to include a greater number of 1-bedroom houses, some 2 bedrooms. They're not completely overturning their development programme, but they are upping the proportion of 1-bed houses, sometimes with a heavy heart. But there is more evidence of that at the moment, and as you say, you can understand why that's happening.
Can I just clarify? Insofar as Jeff's question is concerned on solid stone-built houses, there is a programme out there for insulating those homes now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on all the different sort of grants and funds that are available, some through UK government schemes and some through Scottish government schemes. The one thing that I think is dominating a lot of the thoughts of local authorities and housing associations at the moment is that the Scottish government's programme, forward programme for assisting people, was quite heavily dependent on the energy company obligation and what contribution that would make. And there is, as you know, a lot of doubt about now whether the eco side of things will be as substantial as it was because of the Prime Minister's suggestion or strong indications now that that's going to be pared down in order to knock a few quid off energy bills. So it's a fluid issue. Quite what level of help is going to be available in the long term, and certainly when you think about that spreading to homeowners by some kind of compulsion under minimum standards, then we're not sure what will be available in the longer term.
Mr. Lance?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to expand on David's summary, in terms of the local picture, we have received funding through the catchily titled Home Energy Efficiency Programme Scotland area-based schemes, HEAPSABs. And we are working in partnership with the Energy Agency to deliver that. The programme nationally has been impacted by the doubts around eco-funding, which supplement the work that the energy companies are doing. Our contract was entered into very quickly, and we were, I think, one of the first local authorities to let our contract under HEAPSABs, and we've been working since last summer to deliver that. We will be bringing the report back to Housing Subcommittee with the results of that programme. It hasn't been easy. Hard to treat properties, which is where we were focused on, are complex, difficult and expensive. But I think we've made as good a job of it as any other local authority, but we'll bring in a report back on that. And in terms of the longer term picture, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in terms of funding arrangements and what will happen going forward.
Councillor Smith?
In my ward, it's a kind of unique one in the sense that there's probably more private sector rented accommodation than there is social landlord rented accommodation, particularly given the fact it covers Dumfries town centre. There's a lot of private rented accommodation there, and some of it is in pretty appalling condition. And I was interested in what you said about social landlords becoming involved in the private sector, if you like. Is that something that's developing in other parts of Scotland?
I can't say it's widespread at the moment. I mean, I think there are a small number of, some of the bigger regional or national associations, like Castle Rock Edinburgh, like the Wheatley Group that's grown out of Glasgow Housing Association, that are currently making some full market rent provision. And the initial indications from them, and most of them are involved in mid-market rent as well, two quite sort of distinct provisions, is that it's popular. People seem to be aware of the sort of regulated nature of social landlords in Scotland, and the fact that there's a 6-month tenancy, just like in any other private rented, doesn't seem to put people off at all. It's whether they fundamentally have faith that the landlord will be a decent landlord. But at the moment, I couldn't honestly say that the signs are that we'll see what we've seen in England, which is landlords going into it in parts of England, social landlords going into private rented in quite a big way. I still think there's a sense among a lot of social landlords that that's not why they came into being. Whether we see that change, I think some will. It just allows them to keep their development programme going. It allows them to keep staff working, and it does something in the local economy. It's still about building houses, which is great for the local economy, whatever tenure they are. But it's slow moving. And I can't hand on heart say I'm on top of whether your major landlord DGHP is in or is looking at that market. I'm pretty sure they're involved in mid-market provision. I'm not sure about full market, in the hotspot areas where it would be relevant. But it's slow moving.
Mr. O'Neill?
Locally, both Lord Burn and DGHP, through their subsidiaries, are involved in the provision of mid-market rent. And in fact, this subcommittee's actually made funding decisions in the past to fund mid-market rent properties. But the biggest kind of venture into that area that we've got at the moment is the National Housing Trust properties out at Marksfield and Dumfries, where there's 69 mid-market rent units being provided, and obviously the council's funding that up to the tune of £9 million. and they're due to come on stream later this month, the first set of properties.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you. There's currently legislation through the planning process on private developers to supply affordable housing in the developments over a certain size. 20-25% has to be affordable. But there seems very little support from government on the financial side of this to the developer, because it obviously has costs on the site and the viability of developing some of the sites in that situation. And is there any movement from government within the new bill coming forward to increase support of that and therefore increase the supply of affordable housing to the sector through private development?
I'm certainly not aware of anything that would enhance the support for Section 75 or planning gain through affordable housing policy. If anything, you'll again probably know more about this than me. My sense was that it's been considerably watered down. I think councils were written to by John Swinney a year or two back, saying in the light of what's happening in the downturn in the market, in the housing market, you are permitted to relax those the 25% or whatever those policies, if you so wish. And I don't sense a great keenness at the moment on the part of the Scottish Government to try and even get that back to where it was, let alone try and get more out of the system. We've got a good contacts and a lot of respect for the developer lobby, Homes for Scotland, and bodies like that. That they are a strong lobby, and at the moment, what they're arguing is that the state of the new build market is such that when anything comes along, whether it's new building standards that they sought to get relaxed, or whether it's planning, particularly Section 75 contributions, they have a very strong lobby that is saying now is not the time. So I certainly don't detect any. I'm not an expert on planning policy, but I don't detect a great willingness on the part of ministers to push that at the moment.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. It's more an observation than a question. It's back to enhancement of energy efficiency and properties. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there is a particular problem with older houses, where, in fact, very often they're listed. I mean, I'm working with constituents at the moment in the context of Whithorn, with Historic Scotland, endeavouring to get them to accept that there is a problem, because these properties, by their very nature and their listing, etc., you're only allowed to carry out certain works in a fashion which are acceptable to Historic Scotland. And as I say, I think first of all, getting them, the first step is to get them to appreciate there is a problem, and that people, are living in these, unless they can get the consent to go ahead and do it, will finish up being discriminated against. And having got them to accept that, as I say, there will have to be a political will on their part to endeavour to do something about it. And I would imagine that that's not peculiar to, for instance, the likes of Whithorn and Wigtown. I would imagine that in most of our towns and communities in Dumfries and Galloway, there is a core of such properties, and that should be lost sight of.
If there are no other speakers, I'd just like to thank Mr Bookbinder for the presentation and also for bearing with us, for me taking an item that should have been after him before him. Thank you very much. I'll move on to item 4, presentation on street design project by Sederunt. I believe it's Mr Ruffles will be presenting the presentation.
So, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us to give this presentation. My name is Nuria. I'm the project officer of the street design project in Queen Street, Maclellan Street, Brook Street, and Cameron Street. I came from Spain. That's why I had this accent. I'm trying very hard, having haggis and porridge and whiskey, but still it's not working very well. So I hope that you can understand me okay, at least. Well, our project, the aims of our project is to have a safer and more attractive street where people came first. That means that people are more important than cars for us. And, well, what we are doing here is just to help residents to design this street and to design some improvements in the street. So I think the key of this project is that it's a residents project, and we are here just to help them to make it real and make it happen. For doing that, we are meeting very often residents, and we are working quite hard to encourage them to participate in the project and to be involved. We started working at the end of last month of May last year, and our first public event was in July. It was a very successful and festive event on the street. We had about 60 attendees between residents and people that were interested in the project, even councillors. And we were asking them about the issues of the street, where we use flowers to show them that with very simple, small things, we can make a difference. We gave them a pot plant, and we put a pot plant in each one of the front doors of the neighborhood. It was very successful. People really appreciate that, and you could really see the difference. And it was very, very nice to meet residents and to understand what are the issues in the neighborhood. After that event, we met again with the residents in September. This was a more serious session in which we asked them to create a vision statement. This is the vision statement that they create. They said that we want to live in a high-quality neighborhood in keeping with its Victorian heritage, where it's easier to travel around on foot and traffic is managed to the benefit of all residents. And this is now our mantra, to keep the Victorian heritage that is really important for residents, and to make it easier to travel on foot. Well, because a resident who has to design, we had to think of the way to make it easy for them, and we are doing it by using a model kit. And the model kit, we have objects such as trees and planters and small things to draw, like crossing places or zebra crossing, for example. And people can experience with these objects making improvement in the street. You can see in the photo. We were using also this giga map of the area, so they can put everything that they want to put in the street. Well, with the designs that residents made with the model kit are now the basic of our project. And you can see the designs in the newsletter I gave early in the morning. These are just designs that our urban designer made using the designs that residents make in this session, in the model kit session. After that session, we dedicate a workshop, especially to speak and to have a reflection on heritage and art and how to enhance the neighborhood with art and where we can put art. And I think something important that we have after this workshop was the ferns as a project symbol. Paul will show you later how we are using now, or how we are planning to use. Well, we are trying to make it easier for residents to participate in the project and to be involved. So we are having a lot of sessions, and we had a design session, actually 2 design sessions, and then a review session to show residents the design that you can see in the newsletter, and to make it possible for them to do comments, and also for those residents that couldn't attend the other meeting to make their first comments and ideas, and to give us their ideas. And well, after all these meetings and workshop sessions, we noticed that business owners, they didn't came to our sessions because actually they are really busy keeping their business. So we decided to go to them and visit them and showing the designs that we had at the moment, and asking them what they think and what are the issues in their perspective. You can see some of their opinions. It was really interesting to visit them. And well, to finish sorry, this is not such a nice picture, but to finish the year, we had a Christmas social event just to give residents another opportunity to join us in the project and to have more comments on the designs. So after all this work, we think that the project is really popular. Well, we are knocking the doors every month, at least once, sometimes twice a month. And I think, well, actually, I am sure that everybody in the neighborhood knows the project. Residents are quite enthusiastic. We're very enthusiastic. And we used to have a very high turnout to events. We estimate that at least about 50% of residents had already been in at least one of our sessions. And we are also happy that are not only residents, but also council officers that are really helping us to do this project and to make it happen. And well, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul. I work for Sustrans as well. I'm aware that lunch is coming, so I'll be reasonably brief, and but I'll be around afterwards if you want questions as well. I've only got 100 slides. I'm joking. As I said, I work for Sustrans. We've had a long relationship with Dumfries and Galloway Council, very positive relationship, I should say, as well. And you'll know, probably if you've lived here for a while, there's lots of fantastic cycle routes out in the countryside. Well, they're very good for people that live in the countryside. They're not so great if you live in a town centre like Dumfries. It needs a bit of a different approach to making our urban areas work better for people for walking and cycling. We're very grateful for the opportunity to work with Dumfries and Galloway Council, particularly Jim's department, strategic housing. And for us, that's quite an innovative step to work with a housing department rather than a transportation department as the first point of contact. When you look at neighbourhoods and how to make them work better for walking and cycling, it needs consideration not just of what's on the ground, but actually the structure of the street, and also the quality, how people use, feel and think about their streets. That really echoes quite well with the Scottish Government's recent policy designing streets, which says that when you consider digging up a street or regenerating a street or putting new streets in, you must consider the place quality, the bits that people attribute to the space outside their door, the sociability of it, the playfulness of it, the quality, the friendliness really, alongside any interventions on the road as well. Better places are better places for walking and cycling. And that's really the motto that we're taking behind this. The other element that's critical to this project is we're working, from our perspective, as far as we can from the bottom up. And that chimes really well with Scottish Government's policies as well, an assets-based methodology. People are the first point of contact for this project, and the people that live on those streets are the first point of contact for this project. I respect the fact, though, that when you go through the process, you also need to have a certain degree of filter and kind of management of expectations and ideas as well. So the project's been running since July. As we said, we spent a lot of time talking to people. We also spend a lot of time trying to understand what people think and feel about the street and what they'd like to see. And we try and find structured ways of taking that information and bringing it back to people. What we don't want to be is the people that say, oh, you've told us this, here's your design, it's getting built. It's very much an iterative position where we take away ideas, we bring them back, we consider amongst themselves and yourselves as well, and we take them back again and get comments on. So the idea is that we'll get consensus as we go along on a set of design proposals, small interventions, we're not digging up entire streets, that will make the neighbourhood work better for walking and cycling and make it a better place to be sociable, spend time on, and kind of people feel like, God, this is my neighbourhood. I like this place. This is a great place. I should say the area we're working in, Queen Street, if you look at it on a map of Dumfries, it's virtually isolated from the rest of the town by Brooms Road and Shakespeare Street. It's almost like an island. We recognise right from the start that Queen Street alone isn't, for us, the sole point of the project. It's about looking at the whole neighbourhood in that area that's in that island. So we are working over multiple streets rather than just the one. We had an event back in October 2012. We got lots of people's ideas just to test the water, see what people thought about the project or thought about what they'd like to see improved. We tried to map that, and we brought that back to all the residents on the street. That went out with a newsletter at Christmas that year. As we go along, if we are proposing changes to the street, it's really important that we don't just kind of take an experiential or kind of a technical viewpoint and say, you're getting this, we know what's best for you. To our mind, it's really good that we take time to explain to people what could happen, what the potential benefits, and also costs of that could be. Urban design is very, very simple. It's about making changes to spaces that work better for people and for all the things that go on in those spaces. It isn't great shakes, really. It's quite simple. And it's not a hard thing to explain to people for them to get grips of that as well, of all ages. We try to respect what's already there. Queen Street, as you know, and the neighbourhood surrounding it's got a lovely Victorian character, a bit dilapidated in places, but the potential is beautiful there. I think anywhere else in the country, it would be a remarkable place to live. And I think here it's beautiful. The potential of it is great, really great. So we try to take note of what's already there and put stuff back that we think will be respectful of what's there as well. We've taken, you'll see in the top right of this, some ideas that came from residents. They're not from us about what they'd like to see on streets, and that's the images on the top right with the bits of doubt on. We're trying to interpret those, and what we're trying to do is, once again, as we go along this process, say, you've told us this, we've played around with this idea, and our interpretation of it is this, and I'll show you that in the next few slides. I will stress that there's stuff in the documents you've got on your table. They are draft designs. They're not fixed, they're not definitive, they're not definitely going to happen. It's about building consensus and working out what will work best for the community, for the council, in terms of long-term liabilities as well, and for us, really. I don't know if you can see this really well. It's quite bleached, but this is, it's not called Theatre Place, but we think the area outside the theatre at the top of Queen Street has got great potential. It's dissected from the upper part of Queen Street by Shakespeare Street, which has currently got quite a high level of traffic on it, and it's quite a wide area. So one idea we're looking at and developing, and we'll bring that back to, is about trying to narrow that street. So it makes it easier for residents to walk across that street, and it kind of breaks that severance down there as well. These are just draft ideas, they're not fixed. If you were to look at historical photos of Shakespeare Street, it was there, actually. It's been taken away. It's been taken away by the expansion of those roads, which I think were a bypass of the town. Is that right? Yeah. Before the bypass, sorry. This is the centre of Queen Street, where it intersects with McLennan Street. But once again, I don't know if you can see, but we're just proposing to raise up the area around the centre. This wouldn't be like a speed bump. Your car wouldn't kind of judder as you go over it. It would be quite gradual to go up and over it as well. What it would do, it would make it easier for residents to go from one side of the street to the other. It would slow traffic down to a degree, but it also build on the element of quality that's already in the street. The image to the top right, you can't really see, but it's a map of sociability on streets. If you have a very busy street in terms of traffic volumes or speeds, people are less sociable. They will know people on the opposite side of the street less. So we think by slowing stuff down, making it easier for people that are also less able to cross the road at that point, we can bring back a little bit of that sociability and character to that part of the street. This is the Brooms Road junction as it comes out from Queen Street. I don't know if you can see, but the bottom right image, it's quite bleached, but we're just proposing to narrow the road as it comes out. These are just ideas at the moment. It's just making the junction slightly shorter, smaller places, easier for a person that's less able or less fast on their feet to get from one side to the other. With these spaces that go into the street, I'm very aware that you probably don't want acres and acres of tarmac. No one wants that. It creates drainage issues. It also just creates bland spaces. So what you don't see on these designs, but what you will see on later designs, is a description and detail of what might go on these spaces if it's approved. And I think for many people, it's about quality. So potentially it could be trees, it could be greenery, it could be planters, it could be detail in cobbling or in surfaces. What we're very keen to do, and we're very keen with any local authority, is not to land people with liabilities. If we put stuff in, it's got to be stuff that you're happy to have and that will not cost you in the long term. So these spaces that could be created create opportunities to put something in also that says something about the character of the neighbourhood, a bit of definition as well. This is the access into Cumberland Street, and the bottom image. This street is, Jim knows the street quite well. Sorry. A lot of people on that street have told us it's used as a bit of a rat run to try and get round the series of lights and stuff on Brooms Road. So people have said that it's quite a hard street as well. So we're proposing to make some changes to the start of that street so that it, once again, adds a bit of character to the street, but discourages people from using it as a bypass to the surrounding streets. Potentially also putting street trees or greenery back into the road space as well. That can have a really positive effect and slows traffic down and just breaks that kind of hard feel of that street as well. People have asked for this. These aren't ideas that we've just come up with. They've actually asked for these ideas. I'm very quickly, I've got 2 slides left. This is Brook Street, looking down onto McClellan Street, which is the large yellow area. And so once again, we're proposing to raise up the middle section of Brook Street. The image isn't quite correct. It should actually show a complete table there. And that would make it easier for people coming from the Brooms Road car park, come right along McClellan Street, straight up onto DG1 through the footpath as well. Nuria alluded to this earlier. It's a lovely area. It's got Victorian character is probably its biggest selling asset. The Victorians were well known for their love of ferns, which is quite ironic because they're actually quite toxic, I think. These are drawings that were done by residents of ferns. So, and we propose to take some of these ideas, work them up, and potentially they could go in some of the new spaces that are created, or could even go in small detail on the signage in the area. Just to say, to complement, this is our neighbourhood. This is a place that we care for, this is a place that we've engaged with, and this is a place that we're interested in. And this is what we think of it. These are some ideas, some very draft ideas about how they could look, for example, if they were embedded in stone. But they could go on metal, they could go on signage. It could be very simple. Once again, we're very aware that we don't want to land people with liabilities. The durability, quality is the big overriding idea. Cool. I'll stop there because this is Nuria's slide. But, next steps for us, and I'll be very brief, is we are working away on a more detailed set of design proposals. They will come back to Jim and his colleagues in transportation as well for consideration, and we'll take those back out to the public a bit later on to get their consent on those. We're very keen that we don't raise expectations too much, and I know for yourself it's a balance of expectation management, really. So it's about getting something that we know we can deliver, know it can be done on the ground, doesn't land you with a liability, but adds quality and does something positive for the neighbourhood. It's a great area, and I think we can add to that. Okay, I think that's probably it for me. I'm more than happy to take questions. What I will say as the last thought is this is a really good partnership project between us and the council, and I'm very glad that you've invited us to come and work with you so far. And we're going great shakes, I think. Cool.
Members get any questions? Councillor Cars?
I think you touched on it anyways. I think it's fantastic designs. I'm really pleased it's slide for the bottom up. In regards to maintenance, that's always an issue for the council. Revenue budgets are under pressure. Yeah. So when it comes to maintenance, like I think you actually touched on it, how does it compare to what's existing? Say this is implemented, there'll be a cost against that, be a capital cost, but looking after it thereafter, how would that compare to what we have at the moment? Have you any ideas on that?
Yeah, well, what I would say is we're working currently with transportation and gym, so we're very aware that whatever might go underground has to be something that you approve of and currently use or are happy to be able to source and resupply. So we're not potentially adding in features or objects or stuff that is difficult or expensive to obtain or pick up. We don't make any long-term commitments to maintenance. It's about working with you guys to come up with something which you're happy to have in the area and you know you can look after as well. So
Can I just add to
Yeah,
that? Well, there's a steering group in place that's got officers from a range of services across the council, including significant representation from DG First, who would then be responsible for ongoing maintenance issues. And they have a very vigorous eye on costs, and there is no way we would get agreement from them to do things that would leave the council in a very financially disadvantageous position. So that's very much to the fore of consideration.
Councillor Smith?
Thanks, Chair. We had an item earlier where the issue around the lack of consultation with residents was a key problem, and I think what strikes me about this project, and it's in my ward, is there's been significant consultation with residents, and it is really a bottom-up project, and residents are really involved in it. And I think there is an issue about expectation management there as a result of that, but there is significant involvement of residents, significant involvement in information and given to local ward members as well, which is something I very much appreciate. I think the partnership work, not just with this department but across the council, is really important, because I think one of the things that strikes me, and one of the criticisms the council get in the past, and I've made this point to the team, that if, for example, you're doing things like raising areas, putting raised tables in the centre of roads, the council will get a kick in if we do that, but we haven't actually tarmacked the rest of the road and there's 5 potholes sitting next to it. So it's really important that we do this partnership work. We don't sort of make these types of improvements without making sure that the other departments are getting the basics right. So, you know, it's part of a ongoing work, or we just get a criticism, you're spending all this money on a raised table, but actually you've no fixed the pothole next to it. So I think that's a really important thing. I think we've obviously got to be conscious that it's really important for residents, but it's important for the wider town. Lots of people use that street, maybe rightly or wrongly, in terms of driving cars, but a lot of people use that street as well. So it's about getting the balance right, I suppose, between the sort of wider public and residents as well. What I'm keen to know is sort of when do we kind of move from, I suppose, a lot of the good design work that's going on to the actual implementation of a lot of these things? What sort of rough timetable have we got? And like, it's all subject to resources, etc. Some work's already ongoing through things like the railings, etc., which has been fantastic, I have to say. And if we can put more funding into that, I'll be very supportive of that because it has been successful. But when we sort of actually move to actually implementing some of this stuff, it'd be good to know.
I can maybe start and then maybe pass a bit of that on to you, Jim, if that's all right. We, our current plans are to go back out to the public with a newer version of the designs. It'll probably be early March, the way things are going on, but that'll be far more detailed and that'll have a description of the materials, actually the layout of what might happen. We're working closely with John Howell in transportation. I think what we're trying to do is preempt a lot of the lengthy time delays that might happen if something goes into the council in terms of it having to be programmed into someone picking that up. We're putting a lot of investment into that to try and speed that up. We currently are hopeful, I think, of getting this on the ground towards the latter part of the summer. I need to check with Jim and John today. We have a stakeholder group meeting straight after this meeting as well. Expectation, you quite rightly mentioned, is a big thing. And I think Jim's, the wider project which we've dovetailed into, that a lot of people want stuff to happen, but we are very aware that if you want quality, it takes time, it takes small steps. So we're very keen to make sure we get it right and we don't end up with angry residents, angry councils, angry locals. It's got to be something that kind of there's broad consensus on this is a good thing. We're not rapid at this, but we're trying small steps.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This project was just one of the actions in the wider housing regeneration action plan. So what we propose to do is bring an update in the wider action plan back to the subcommittee in March. But there are things happening out with the work that Sustrans are doing. So, for example, there's new street lighting going to be delivered on the street in the next, we hope, in the next 2 months. And again, that's Victorian heritage street lighting, and it's a move from orange lights to white lights, and we hope that that'll have give locals a message that things are happening and there isn't delay. Another example of things that have happened is the theatre agreed to prioritise the work in the two houses at the side of the theatre. And one of the actions in the action plan from this subcommittee was to fund sash and case window replacement in that building because it was sitting boarded up. So that's actually happened as well. In terms of what Fiona's doing, we've brought empty properties back into use. So all I'm trying to give a flavour of is it's not all just hanging in the Sustrans element of the project. And I think the actions that have been taken, members will be interested to see the progress that we've made across a range of issues when we bring that back in March. We're trying to keep the public and local residents aware that things are ongoing and it's not all dependent on a start date at some point in the future, because there's a risk that people would lose interest.
If members have no other questions, I'd like to thank Mr Ruffles and his colleague. I'm not attempting to say your surname. You're probably better at English than I would be at saying your surname. And just thank you for taking the time to come and see us, and also for waiting until we had took a more important one item earlier on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'd be more than happy to share information at any point, newsletters, circulate.
Move on to item 5, Strategic Housing Investment Plan. I believe Mr Lynch, you're going to be speaking to this. Is there anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. No, nothing further to add to the report, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few points here that I'd like to bring up with reference to the SHIP. First of all, within the recommendations, it states that all the projects that are listed here will come out of the council tax second homes budget. Now, in past meetings, I know that we have allocated that money to insulation projects and that over the past year. And I'm just wanting to have clarification, first of all, in that aspect, that all those projects have been completed or have been financed effectively, as we had detailed there, before we start going into taking extra funding out of that particular section and that for different projects that we have listed here. Moving on, 3.2 there, that's sort of, that was basically in relation to the extra funding coming out of that to provide a development coordinator to that particular project. Well, that's, as I mentioned earlier in the committee meeting, I feel quite strongly about that depending on our decision on the trust housing issue, but that seems to have been partially resolved for the meantime. So I'm fully supportive of a development coordinator in a particular project like this, but do have concerns about ongoing funding for that year after year, as is designated here. 3.3 in the Eastfield Road, if we're being asked for funding towards the contribution of the procurement of that site, which is at very, very early stages, obviously, what future costs would be expected to be supported by the council throughout that whole development? Because at this stage we're being asked for the support the procurement of the site itself. Moving on to 3.5 regards the Friars Vennel, the money we're being asked to support that is for the completion of the commercial units within that particular sector, and I appreciate DGHP will be funding the flats above that for social rent. And within that, if we're providing money to complete commercial units, would the council be looking to receive any revenue from the future lease or sale of those particular commercial units? Because they're not linked to RSLs and social renting. So that's a question that I would like answered, please.
If you can just let Mr Lynch answer those ones, and then if you've got any further, I'll let you back in, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll work through the questions. Please come back if I've missed any of the questions that you put, Councillor Peacock. In terms of the first question, I think the reference was to the Greener Homes Fund that you agreed to support the SHIP. That's an ongoing programme. So we've not fully committed the funding that you allocated to that. That was up to £500,000, but it's linked to the development programme. And the development programme, as you'll know, doesn't operate on a strict kind of financial year basis. But we've got money set aside to support the Greener Homes Fund, and the additional call contained in this report can be accommodated as well. The nature of the Council Tax Second Homes Fund is that it's very fluid. We generate maybe about £900,000 a year. We don't always physically spend that money in a year, so some funds build up. But what we do is make sure that the Housing Subcommittee commits funding to projects as they go forward. And to make sure that they're viable from the outset, that funding commitment needs to be in place at the start, but may not be drawn down for a year or two. And it's about managing that through the process. So yes, we have got the funding, and we can accommodate the Greener Homes commitments that you made earlier. In terms of the Thornhill Development Coordinator, you raised the question about that and about the earlier report. Obviously not wishing to reopen the debate about trust, but the distinction is that what we're talking about here is establishing a new facility with a new service. And the difficulty that we had in trust was in relation to an existing contract and providing supplementary funding to an additional contract. So it's quite a specific, but it's a distinct difference between them. In terms of the schemes going forward, obviously the members agreed at the Housing Subcommittee in September that this kind of revenue funding to support housing support would be an appropriate use. It complies with the Scottish Government ministerial guidance on the use of those second homes, and we consider it to be a safe recommendation to go forward, that you can call on this money on a recurring revenue basis. In relation to Eastfield Road, there's no commitment in terms of any future costs. The core of the programme is funded through the Scottish Government Affordable Housing Investment Programme. What we try and do is provide additional necessary funding to make the viability of the schemes work. Site acquisition and the abnormal development costs is something we've done previously, but that doesn't bind the council into any additional funding. And the developers of this scheme, which is Lawburn, have assured us that that additional money will make the scheme viable for them. In terms of the Friars Vennel project, the additional 150,000 is to develop the commercial units, but they will be retained within the ownership of DGHP. There is no proposal to then sell them on, and much like any other accommodation that DGHP owns and rents, there is no reciprocal arrangement for the council to receive a return on that investment. So that's not the basis on which we're proposing the 150,000 is provided. The Friars Vennel project is a particularly complex and challenging one, as you'll know. It's very expensive. It's at the heart of the housing regeneration area that we talked about. In strict financial terms, no developer would consider it. It's because the council identified it as a key strategic priority to uplift the whole of the Vennel that we've made the decisions that we have in terms of funding and support. And this is another piece of that jigsaw. But there's no expectation, certainly within the report, that there be any return on that grant investment, much like the rest of the SHIP programme.
You got other ones you want to bring up, Councillor Peacock?
I'm grateful to Mr. Lynch for his answers, and most of them I'm more than satisfied with. Just coming back to the Friars Vennel, it's not the general sort of basis of DGHP to be involved in commercial properties. I think it's generally the sort of social landlord aspect that they're dealing. So, whilst I appreciate what you're saying there, is there anything that we could put in place? And I know that officers don't like the words conditions on when we're offering grants for various reasons, but is there something that we could put in place that if the landlord, whoever it may be, was to sell on the commercial side of those properties, then the council would have remit to look to take back some of the grant money that was awarded to them?
Thanks, Chair. If members wished us to look at that, then we can certainly explore that option with legal services to see if there was some additional condition specifically related to the fact that it was a commercial unit. We could explore that. I couldn't give an absolute answer today to say it would be possible, but we could certainly look at it if members are minded for us to do that, and we'll provide an update to the next subcommittee.
Councillor Smith?
I think what's important, I think what would be helpful is where we've already provided funding to have that in the report, because obviously some of these is additional funding to what we've previously provided, and I think it'd be helpful to have that in the report. It gives a sort of wider basis. I think there's always a concern that this £900,000 is kind of seen as a wee bit of a, I suppose, a fund that RSLs can sort of dip into. I think, oh, we've got an extra additional wee problem here. We can go off and ask the council for some money out of the second homes income. And I mean, most of these projects, I mean, I don't question them, but it does strike me that some of the things the RSLs and whoever's asking for the funding probably should have known about in the first place. I mean, the Friars Venner one's a prime example. It's that's a project that we've given quite substantial funds to already. What is it they've discovered now that they didn't realise at the time when they first drew up the plans and costed those plans and we gave them funding? What is the actual 150,000 for? What's changed effectively? I think it's important that we don't just say, well, we could do a bit extra money, we'll come to the council for that. I mean, the Friars Venner one is now a really, really substantial investment. Now, I can understand the reasons for that. You could build those flats anywhere else for a far smaller amount of money, but the bigger picture is the regeneration of a historic street and a site that's got significant problems. So that's why we're spending additional funds. But it is starting to get to a stage with a lot of money, and I think it's important that we get the sort of wider picture in some of these reports.
Thanks, Chair. Certainly note the point Councillor Smith makes in terms of providing more information, and we certainly will try and do that, and that's what we've always tried to do in terms of previous reports, but going forward we'll make sure that that level of detail is included. In terms of the excuse me, in terms of the Friars Venner project, the additional funding has always been known by DGHP. They said from the outset in terms of their financial plans that they probably needed this level of funding to make those units work. They've looked for funding from other sources, both external and within the council, and have not been able to secure that funding. So that's why we've suggested we step in to make sure that it doesn't undermine the more significant housing project, which is obviously the issue for us. So it's not a new piece of information. It's just that the timing of it has been such that it's because they've tried to secure funding from elsewhere and have drawn a blank. So they've requested that the Housing Subcommittee stand in to make sure that this key project keeps on track.
Councillor Crullers?
Chairman, my point is 3.2. I'm struggling with that, and I know there's a decision made in September in regards to revenue funding, how we can do that through the East. I'm really struggling with that in regards to it's the ongoing. When does it get reviewed? It goes against the thrust of what we were speaking about earlier in regards to trust in particular. So does that get reviewed? Does it go on in perpetuity? There's nothing specific there, just to get an understanding of that. But I have got real concerns over that.
Thanks, Chair. What we certainly could build into the Commission on Housing Support Services is if members agree this initial funding through the council tax second homes money to establish the scheme, once established with that facility, it essentially becomes another housing support facility. It would then become part of the sectoral review of the Housing Support Service. And within that wider pot of money, that could be a way of dealing with the question about absolutely guaranteeing recurring funding into the future in perpetuity or for however long the contract lasts. So we can link those two processes. But the key issue here is that there's an opportunity to provide the initial funding through the second homes funding to establish the project. Thereafter, in terms of revenue, we would have options in terms of managing that budget from potentially other pots of money.
Thanks, I mean, that's a really good idea, really good suggestion. If we could build that in, so that certainly it's almost like a pump prime for the first year, and it's looked at through the commission and thereafter, and it can be addressed. And now, if it can't be addressed through the commission, I think we should look at it again through on an annual basis or whatever. But I'm sure it will be addressed through the commission.
Councillor Dempster.
It was the same yin, Chair. It doesn't say the coordinator specifically for the Thornhill complex. It doesn't build in an inflationary increase annually, so you'll finish up with trust housing a number of years down the road. And what's probably more unusual, unless we have a policy that says we can introduce at any time new developments and revenue. Section 5 says, as this report does not propose a change in policy, there's no impact assessment. I thought we'd need an impact assessment because it seems to me a change in policy that we're just introducing new developments and a proposal to revenue fund them for indefinite period. And I would suggest as well it would give other RSLs the opportunity to come along with a similar proposal for the March meeting, because that's where I would see it going. If I were a RSL, that's what I'd be doing. And as has been said by other members, we find ourselves challenged by existing contracts and arrangements, and here we're proposing a new one.
In terms of it being a policy, we've clearly not approached it in that way. What we've said, it's a project within the strategic housing investment plan, where the proposal adds value to that project development. I've not conceived of it as being a new policy. It's a way of dealing with the funding challenges of providing these much needed services and facilities. In terms of how that can be managed through, I've offered through the response to the Councillor Carruthers question, a way of securing the revenue funding going forward. And the proposal is there as part of the SHIP process. So that's why we didn't consider it to be a new policy, because it's part of the ongoing delivery of the SHIP that's been previously agreed by members.
If I can just come back briefly, Chair. It's also bizarre that Abbeyfield had it as a sheltered complex. I know the configuration of properties was one of the main issues why it wasn't popular with residents, but Abbeyfield ran it as a sheltered complex with a warning. They run off and abandon it. We now reconfigure it and start picking up a bill now that we wouldn't give to Abbeyfield, which seems to me as well unusual. Had we increased the revenue to Abbeyfield and invested in the reconfiguration of the properties, wouldn't be doing what we're doing today.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the proposal, it's a complete remodelling of the facility and the services. So it doesn't compare to what Abbeyfield looked at, ran, and decided that they could no longer run. It's a different proposal, it's a different model.
Councillor Lever.
To a large extent, my question's been asked by a number of members of the Shelter Development Coordinator and revenue funding. I mean, £900,000 a year is a significant sum of money, but we keep making piecemeal commitments, then the £900,000 is going to be tied up, which gives us no freedom whatsoever in future years. So I do think it's something which we need to keep our eye on.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm back at 3.2. So far as I'm concerned, Lower Burn is a standalone business, albeit they an RSL, and they would be expected, not unreasonably, to put together a business case for any investment that might be coming forward, and I do not see this as an appropriate spend on the second home's money to sustain essentially a business that Lower Burn have chosen to embark on insofar as subsidising that business in terms of the development coordinator. So I'm not at all happy with that proposal. I would just ask for some clarification on 3.9 and whether or not any information has come back with regard to the reasons for the lack of success in terms of the bid as stated there. Thank you.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Yes, we've now got feedback from the Scottish Government on the issues that impacted in their bid. There were 4 core criteria: value for money, strategic fit, quality and sustainability. And the feedback that we've got is the project scored well against strategic fit for the fund and scored well against links to other town centre initiatives. It fared less well under the 2 remaining criteria, scoring poorly in both value for money and quality and sustainability. Now, in looking at the successful bids, all of the successful bids were either RSLs or local authorities. And in terms of the funding packages that were the subject of the bids, most bids were submitted with additional funds to support the bid. So, for example, one of the successful bids was a council building, and that council was providing additional funding of £612,000 to support their bid. And the unit costs of the successful bids were very small. And I think there's been a tension about probably achieving regeneration outcomes as well as increasing the supply of new affordable housing. And I think we were trying to tackle very complex and difficult buildings that, as John has described earlier, in town centres were never going to score well in terms of the Scottish Government's value for money criteria. However, in Dumfries and Galloway terms, the outcomes would have been very good. So the feedback we've got is limited, but that's it in its entirety.
Councillor Lever.
There was a debate last week on town centre regeneration funding, and Elaine Murray specifically raised the failure to fund the Dumfries and Galloway bid for that, and the local government minister, Derek Mackay, actually did say there may be other ways of funding or looking at funding the project. So I think Elaine's actually written to him to ask for more information on what he was thinking about.
Yep, thanks, Chair. I mean, that's certainly something we can follow up. What we were proposing to do as well, if members were so minded, was bring a report back to March Committee looking at the residential elements of the projects and see, for example, if we could apply some empty homes grant to those projects, and that might be enough to kick-start them. It certainly wouldn't be a request for the extent of funding that was bid to the Scottish Government, but we were thinking about bringing a report back saying, well, there's 7 residential properties. If we pump primed those elements of the buildings, would that be enough to kick-start the whole renovation of the building? And I don't know what members' views are in that.
If there's no further questions, we'll go to the round. Recommendations. Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to come back in. Just a question I was going to bring up just towards the end of the discussion in any case, and Councillor Smith has touched on it. I mean, for future meetings, and I appreciate that we're virtually at the end of this financial year, so we'll be looking into the following financial year. I would like to see a sort of template of sort of grants and budgets that come to this committee, so that for all the money that we're being asked to grant towards the various projects, I think it would be helpful for members if we could actually just see in a template form, similar to we do at area committees for discretionary grants, you know, what the budget is in that particular pot, what has already been committed, you know, what is left for us to commit to these things. I just think it would be helpful because throughout the housing subcommittee here, we have a lot of input into a lot of different projects, and sometimes I feel it can be a bit confusing as to where the money's coming from, where it's being allocated to, how much is left. And we just produced with a report that says they recommend an X amount to a certain project, but it doesn't tell us that if we do that, that will only leave a very minimal amount in that particular budget, or there'll be a lot left. So I would like something like that to come forward for members, and I think it would just help in the clarity.
I would certainly agree that following for the next financial year, we should be able to get that into reports. I'll now turn to recommendations. Recommendation 2.1, with members, with what's been said, you want to go through every one of them and decide yea or nay. Go to 3.2, Thornhill. We're being asked to revenue fund to appoint a shelter development coordinator at a cost of 32,479 in year one, and thereafter 28,365. Councillor Crothers.
My proposal would be to remove the and the thereafter 28,365 per year, and that should be looked at through the commissioning as we look at this as it goes forward. So we're certainly putting a guarantee in there for the first year, but thereafter, because I do think, I mean, that's 2/3 of a new build when it comes to a unit, and the grant allocation that would be coming in from Scottish Government, so that's over half a house every year pretty much when it came to, so looking at, I think it should be looked happy for the first year, but if we could take it and thereafter 28,365, it might well be accommodated through the commissioning, but through a proper, properly sourced revenue route.
Any other members get any other proposals on that one? Councillor Smith?
That ties in with the timetable, though, of this being looked at. 1 year's enough, is it? From what you said earlier in terms of the timetable.
Yeah, it will be enough. Yeah, we in terms of year one costs, obviously that will kick in once the scheme's up and running, and we're some way away from that. But if that's the decision the members make, we can build that into the commissioning timetable.
Our members can take. Councillor Collins?
Chair, no, I think it's an inappropriate use of the second home's income, and I'm totally opposed to the proposal.
In that case, have we a seconder for either of them? What would be an motion or amendment? Councillor Peacock?
Chair, I would second Councillor Crowther's motion, if it's going forward as a motion.
Councillor Guinness?
Well, I must confess, sir, I really am struggling to understand the logic and the rationale of giving funding for the first year and then now doing it for future years. So, on that basis, I'll second Councillor Collins.
Councillor Collins?
Just to clarify my motion, that was to pump prime and thereafter to be through a different route, just not through second homes. Just for clarity, and that is to maintain the service. But so I'm agreeing with that. That's why I put that forward. I would took the same stance as Councillor Collins in regards to that, just not to finance it at all. But I'm thinking, no, it should be, it's a service, something with, it's viable, something we're supporting. Therefore, but it shouldn't come through the capital route. It should come through the revenue route.
Can you just remind us what the motion and the amendments are, please?
Can I just clarify, Councillor Geddes, did you say you seconded Councillor Collins?
Yes.
I didn't catch it.
I did indeed.
Chairman, there's a motion by Councillor Crothers, seconded by Councillor Peacock, to agree to 3.2, the revenue funding to appoint a shelter development coordinator at a cost of 32,479 in year one, and to remove the words "and thereafter 28,365 per year," to look at other sources of future revenue funding. The amendment by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Geddes, is to not agree 3.2 today, as it's not an appropriate use of second home's income.
Councillor Dempster, you're wanting clarification?
Yes. Will that in any way impact on the original plan to invest in this property and create what is deemed as essential for that location, this decision we're making today?
Mr. Lunch?
If members were minded not to fund the proposal for a development coordinator, we'd need to take that information back to Lawburn. They would need to review their project. I can't speak on their behalf, but they would need to go through a review process, and we'd advise members the outcome of that. I can't tell you whether the consequence would be a change in service specification, but to continue with the development, or whether they take a different view in terms of the viability. We'd need to have that conversation with Lawburn, and we'd update members if that was the decision today.
Would it be appropriate to defer this vote or this particular item for further information, bearing in mind that we have made a decision to support this development, and the proposal today has a potential impact on a previous council decision?
Yeah, Councillor Collins, you were wanting further clarification?
No, thanks, Leader. Chair, My problem with this is that in its origin, the whole concept of the plan and scheme as a business case would have incorporated a development coordinator as part of the liability within that business plan. So I do not understand why the whole scheme would now pivot on whether or not this additional funding was coming forward. It would have been part of the basis of the origination of the business case in the first place.
Mr. Lynch?
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarification, I didn't say that this funding would be pivotal in its deliverability. What I said is we would need to have that conversation with Lawburn to confirm that. I'm not in a position to advise members one way or the other today. We would need to take that decision away, have the discussion, and then update members further.
In terms of the information that members have in front of them here today, it would appear that this has been an afterthought as a liability, whereas I'm saying it would be integral to the original business case, the cost of this development coordinator. In light of what Mr. Lynch is saying, I'm happy to remit this to the next committee or whenever, when more information is forthcoming and we've got that further information from Lord.
Councillor Geddes?
We need a procedural motion to that effect, sir, and I would have no problems in moving that.
I would just ask the mover and seconder of both the motion and the amendment, are you withdrawing your motion and amendment, and it's a consensus decision to defer?
If that's a simpler process to use rather than, I'm happy to do that, yep.
Councillor Lever?
I think the information should cover more about whether this project is still viable, about why this it's come forward for funding at this stage.
So we have consensus that we'll defer this decision until further information is received. Eastfield Road, an additional 89,000 to require Lowburn Housing to purchase the site and cover additional or abnormal development costs relating to land contamination and site boundary. Beeswing, 5 one-bedroom particular needs for Lowburn Housing. Friars Venal ground floor units. Are members agreeing with Councillor Peacock's suggestion of, as their commercial units, if DGHP sell them on, that we look at recouping the money that we've gave them? Councillor Geddes?
Well, I think to be consistent with the decision we've taken in relation to Thornhill, so we might wish to defer that to get pending submission of the further information to clarify it. Because I don't know what impact, if any, that suggestion might have on DGHP's proposals.
I would tend to agree there. We don't even know if we could actually legally apply that. I would prefer further information about whether we could actually do that or not. If Councillor Peacock's content with that, to defer that to the next meeting for further information.
Yes, Chair. I mean, if we can't legally enforce it, then obviously we can't. So I mean, that information is forthcoming. That would be fine.
Chair, on that particular subject.
Yeah, Councillor Dempster.
Are we then saying that on every occasion when we make a grant and there's a relationship with commercial activity rather than rented accommodation, we would want the same arrangement, because we wouldn't want to be seen to be singling out DGHP? I'm happy to agree with what members are saying, but there have to be consistency in as much as on every occasion when we grant funded a commercial venture, we'd be looking for a return in certain circumstances.
My own particular view would be it would depend how much we were giving them in the first place. I would view each case on its own individual merits. Councillor Geddes and then Councillor Carruthers.
Well, I would certainly not be saying that, sir, because I think some of us have been involved with the development of these proposals, wearing other hats in this council, and I am extremely keen indeed to see this scheme go ahead. But standing that certain members feel that it would be worthwhile, getting further information on that possibility, I don't think it's unreasonable in these particular circumstances, Chair. I stress in these particular circumstances.
So members contain to agree that we defer for further information. Sorry, Councillor Carruthers.
No, it's all right. No, I do agree with that, but it's Councillor Peacock made it particular. It's because it's a commercial and it's an RSL. They're primarily housing, no commercial premises. So it was in that basis.
Yeah. Langham disabled adaptation for a bespoke 4-bedroom property. The Wigtonshire Women's Aid project. And the Sanker project for 100,000. That's regarding an additional sum of 100,000 agreed to allow DGHB to purchase the site and develop the new scheme. Councillor Carruthers?
But AHSP, I didn't see it. I think it's affordable housing something, but AHSP, what is that again?
Thanks, Chair. Stands for Affordable Housing Supply Programme. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Thank you. And the second recommendation to receive a further report on proposal relating to the Dumfries and Properties Town Centre bid and how we can actually try and take that forward. Given the time. Sorry, Councillor Smith.
When we'll get that report? Just was it the next meeting, did you say?
Given the time of the day and looking at the agenda, there's a couple other items that may take some time. I intend breaking for lunch and unfortunately we have no lunch provided today, so rather than the normal half hour, I'm going to give us 40 minutes to go and get something. So 2:10. Okay, I'll make it 45 minutes and say 15:15. Lunch. Now move on to item 6, Common Housing Register Progress Report. I believe Mr. Lynch, you're speaking to this.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Nothing further to add to the report, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Members get any questions? Councillor Carruthers?
Thanks, Chairman. It's in regard to how we've got to the figures have increased dramatically over the last few years. We did quite a big promotion in this, I think 2-3 years ago now. Has there been an uptake in private sector landlords? Is it because of the promotions that we've been undertaking that's caused this increase?
Sorry, we're in the Common Housing Register. Ian. Any members get any questions on the Common Housing Register? Councillor Carson.
Just an update on how the development of the software is going. I know that was one of the reasons things were slowed up. Just to get an update on where we are with the new programme.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can give an update on that. The software developers are Orchard, and the reason for the delay that we reported last year was for them to develop additional software to do with the bedroom calculation. They were commissioned by DGHP to complete that by the first week of January, and that was done and delivered. So DGHP are now testing that software, but it's on time. There was no delays.
Councillor Dempster.
Yeah, thanks. Just a straightforward question. When is the implementation date? Because it'd be useful if we were all briefed in advance, and we're all looking forward to that because it'll make it easier for applicants. That's the purpose of the process.
Thanks, Chair. The report that we brought in November said that the implementation was to aim at the start of the financial year. We didn't set down a specific date. We're still on track for the start of the financial year. There's no current risk to that timetable. The only potential risk, which we will test next week at our next steering group meeting, is the reference at 3.2.1, the Common Allocations Policy, that's currently getting externally validated, which we think is critical in terms of the process. Depending on the scale and scope of any validation comments that we get back and how much additional work we'll need to do the policy, there might be an impact on the timetable, but we don't know that at this stage. If that's the case, then obviously we'll advise members thereafter. But as we currently sit, we're still aiming for the start of the financial year, and there's nothing that we know about at the minute that will suggest any significant delay.
Councillor Dempster.
Thanks. Just a supplementary. I take it that all social landlords now have agreed a common policy, because Lordburn ran a thing called amenity housing, whereby they refused to allocate people under a certain age to these properties. And DGP didn't conduct that type of approach. So I take it we'll now have, or this will be validated, when it's validated, it will be a standard application process and a standard allocation process across all social landlords.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, confirm that. It's a single common allocations policy that will apply across all 4 partner RSLs.
Yeah, Councillor Collins.
Does that mean that the point scoring process will be the same?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, the points allocations, the assessment process will be exactly the same across the 4 RSLs.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks. No, I'm on the right agenda item. And I got, well, no, my papers are actually, so it's not number 6, so I'm still somewhere. It was in regards to, back as went adrift for what Brian said there. I tell you, it was the 5th, we got an update yesterday with a meeting yesterday afternoon with the 4 RSLs in particular. The 5th agency, is that the Dumfries and Galloway Council? That was the only outstanding. It refers to 5 members.
Yes, thanks. 4 RSLs plus the council.
If there's no other questions, we'll go to recommendations. Are members content to note the updated position in taking forward the Common Housing Register project as summarised in the report? And content that regular reports will still be submitted on the Common Housing Register to this committee? Thank you. I'll move on to item 8, which is the registration of private landlords, Part 8, antisocial behaviour, etc. Scotland Act 2004. Mr O'Neill and Mr Glendinning will be speaking to this report. If you've got anything to add to the report?
Vice Chair, nothing to add to the report.
Can I just add one thing in relation to the numbers? The figures were given as per the end of September. I now have the updated figures for the end of December, which shows an increase again in the number of properties, which topped the 10,023 registered properties and 6,553 registered landlords. I would just say that the number of landlords, that includes joint owners of properties. So it's not individual landlords. It includes joint owners who are both required to register the local authority.
Councillor Carruthers.
Just back to the question I asked before in regards to where we were and where we are now. The only other thing complaint I've had in regards to it, don't offend the other members, it's been drawn to your attention, but I know I spoke very briefly about it to John with regards to the way the reminder letter has been sent out is worded. Some were saying that they felt it's very strong, but I think it was the advice I got from John in relation to the Act in particular. But just a good pick up on that as well in regards to that, because I did say I would pick up on that. But again, why with the increase? Is it the increase in private landlords, or just the fact we're getting so much better at picking them up?
I think the initial part was a fairly proactive approach following a sort of reorganisation of the structure and an increase in the size of the department. That was responsible for a significant increase at the outset. We did anticipate this tailing off at some point. However, as you'll see from the graph on the appendix, the numbers just keep rising and rising. There was a dip at the beginning of the year, and that dip really was the second round of renewals. The Act was introduced in 2006. Most of the renewals were approved at the beginning of 2007, therefore they were due for renewal again at the beginning of 2010. And while there's a responsibility on landlords to advise of changes to circumstances, a lot of these are picked up at renewal. So the registration continues to be valid until renewal. We then query it at which point they come off. But again, there's been a steady increase after that. So I would say a lot of proactive work and good joint working between various departments certainly benefits, and they do checks on each application to ensure the property is registered before they process the benefits claims as well. So that's where I think it comes from.
Is there any signs, do you have any indication that more people are becoming landlords in the private sector or not?
Based on pure volume, you'd say yes. I mean, I think it's fair to say that on day-to-day dealings with landlords, a lot of properties come on now are properties that have potentially been inherited and can't be sold, so they see it as an opportunity to make an income in the interim period until the market changes. And that would be probably responsible for a significant number of increases in just one property landlords. But there does appear to be, others who have a larger portfolio continue to add properties to those portfolios as well.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. If proof were needed, and I'm sure most of us would take the view that it wasn't, that this report shows, in fact, how important and how increasingly important the private rented sector is becoming in Dumfries and Galloway. But I would, on the back of that, I would direct your attention to paragraph 4.3 and also to Appendix 2. It's not only important, as a source of alternative housing accommodation, but I think it's absolutely imperative and essential, in fact, that persons who are being registered or who wish to register as private landlords are in fact deemed to be fit and proper. Now, I've been on a number of licensing panels that's dealt with these 7 cases, and while I would reassure anyone that needs reassured that the cases are dealt with strictly on their merits, I think a perusal, even the most cursory perusal of the way that these have been disposed of, will get the message across that the licensing panels, whatever their composition, treat these issues as extremely serious indeed. In fact, de facto, apart from the 2 which were granted subject to fully managed arrangements with agents, i.e. they were not responsible for the day-to-day running and operation of the premises, where in fact it has been challenged as to whether or not a landlord is fit and proper, the panel has in these circumstances taken the view that regrettably they're not.
Sorry, just to comment on that, I mean, it has been a fairly robust process since we changed and reviewed that process, and I think it's been a very positive one in bringing these landlords before the licensing panel. As you'll see, we've not only got new registrations, but there are 2 in there who are existing landlords who have been revoked because of conduct continuing. And I think we are, we're bringing the cases before the panel that justify certainly consideration. And that's one that I think as we progress and as things change, we will potentially be there more frequently. There are some changes proposed in the housing bill about standards and quality and the role of the private rented housing panel, which would allow third-party reporting to that panel. That's the panel that deal with repair and standards and sort of standard issues in properties on behalf of tenants, to allow third-party reporting by the local authority, which I think would be a very positive step if that takes place, because a lot of tenants find themselves in a very vulnerable position of not challenging a landlord because of the condition of the property, simply because of the fear to be evicted or whatever. So if a local authority can report on that on a third-party basis, then I think that's going to be another positive step forward.
Councillor Peacock.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, it's encouraging to see that with the work of Mr Glendinning, the registrations and the properties have gone up, and I think that's a very encouraging factor in Dumfries and Galloway. And sort of coming on the back of Councillor Geddes is there, whilst I fully agree that the licensing panel are very robust in the decisions there, but my question would be actually, for those that have been refused or revoked registration, what then happens to the tenants that are actually in those landlords' properties at this present time? Just because we've revoked the license for them to be a landlord, they've either still have tenants in their properties. We can't make the landlord sell those properties, obviously, so my question would be, what happens to those who are refused or revoked licenses?
Okay, in terms of the revocations, the first step that's taken is an enforcement step, and that's a rent penalty notice is served on the landlord and the tenant. It removes any legal obligation to pay rent at all, so the tenant stays there rent-free. That's the first step. It's then incumbent on the landlord to take action, and this is where I think there is the potential conflict that the landlords may require to recover possession of that property, and it does leave someone potentially as homeless, or certainly not in that property anymore. These decisions that we've come across now are being monitored and followed up to see what's happened, because they're all relatively new, and we just need to make sure that we get into a position where we monitor what happens, because the continued letting of the property, whether there's income taken or not, is an offence. So we need to look at that, and you know, it's not simply about revoking or refusing a registration to allow a landlord to continue to rent unregistered, and that's the next option that we have to look at. I mean, I think in reality, if somebody has a short assured tenancy 6 months and they're only 2 months into that tenancy, then legitimately, I think really they need to stay until the end of that tenancy, unless there's an agreement between landlord and tenant to move out. That's something that I need to explore further, and it's just some of the consequences of the actions that we've actually taken. The hope would be when we've got this that we wouldn't really arrive in this position, because the whole aim is to seek compliance as opposed to seek enforcement action. But where it's necessary, then enforcement and decisions from the panel is clearly the way and the only route that we can take.
Councillor Carson?
Just a quick question. We changed the policy on council tax for empty homes. Do you see that there being a jump in the number of landlords registered as a result of that? And will you be working with the empty homes officer to ensure that the efforts to take and to bring these homes back into use, the landlords and whatever will be registered?
Yeah, I mean, we do work together, and properties that we become aware of that are empty, we'll certainly share that information. I don't know that I can tie any direct link between council tax on empty homes and the number of registrations together exactly, but I mean, I think if you put everything together, there are lots of different aspects that come together to conclude that the numbers are increasing and there's properties out there. What I was going to mention in terms that was mentioned earlier was the importance of this sector. I think the most recent census information suggested there are somewhere in the region of 65,000 properties in Dumfries and Galloway. Now, over 10,000 of those are privately rented properties, and those are the ones that are registered. And given the continuing number that continue to come to our attention, that's pretty significant. I think the national average was between 12 and 15%. We're now topping 15.5% to 16% as it stands at the moment.
Thanks. If members have no other questions, we'll turn to recommendations. Members content to note the significant increase in the number of private landlords and properties currently registered with the council as verbally updated at the meeting. And the decision made on applications presented to the licensing panel is detailed in the report. And agree to receive 6 monthly reports updating members on fit and proper person decisions reached by the licensing panel, so that the key strategic links with the subcommittee are maintained.
Yeah.
Councillor Dempsey?
I wouldn't want to demean the importance of getting this type of information, but given that Alan's sat here for 10:30 to the new to give that information, his time would be maybe better spent elsewhere. And given the short number of cases we deal with, and I concur fully with what Alistair's saying, would an annual report no suffice? Because really it is a management matter where different departments work together to bring to the licensing panel issues that are requiring to be dealt with. And that wouldn't change. That goes on a month-by-month basis. This is only a reporting process. And I would have thought annually would have been adequate, but yeah, that's what other members think. I just think 6 months is maybe too frequent.
If members are content to receive it on a 12-monthly basis, I don't have a problem with that.
I think what the comments Jim made are perfectly valid. So on that basis, yeah, let's make it 12 monthly then. Because as he says, Dave, I mean, the ongoing work is done with the relevant licensing panel anyway.
So that's just a slight amendment to the recommendation 3 to 12 monthly rather than 6 monthly. Move on to item 9, Empty Homes Project. And I believe Mr. O'Neill is speaking to this. However, just before we start that, I would like to once again congratulate the Empty Homes Officer on the award for the Outstanding Individual of the Year that she received at the Empty Homes Conference at the end of last year. Keep up the good work. Mr. O'Neill, have you anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report, and happy to answer questions members may have.
Councillor Carrs?
No, a statement, happy to go with the recommendations as per what's been agreed. No questions on this.
Councillor Geddes?
We're still sharing this post with Scottish Borders. I'm correct from saying my reading of the report, and that makes the performance of the empty homes officer all the more admirable as far as I'm concerned in a Dumfries and Galloway context. And I wonder, without wishing to cause any embarrassment, should we maybe not be looking at the possibility of, in fact, employing or creating a post, full time for Dumfries and Galloway? Because I think, there's I'm not asking you, Chair, to make policy in the hoof. All I'm suggesting is that, would members wish to consider that possibility? Because I feel that it would be in the back of the performance detailed in the report, the member of staff in question working here, 50% of the time. It might not follow, but my supposition would be that, if we're focusing our efforts 100% in Dumfries and Galloway, you might see these performance statistics improving, because every house that's brought back into use, represents a real benefit, a real gain for the region. That's the thrust of my comments.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the Policy and Resources at the end of last year have agreed to fund a full-time officer for Dumfries and Galloway, and the allocation of this 20,000 is to bridge the gap between the end of that contract and the beginning of the new one that is based solely in Dumfries and Galloway. I believe that's...
I stand corrected, Chair, forgive me.
Councillor Dempster?
I think after saying maybe we don't need so many reports, it would be useful if we could see what empty homes are brought into use and what locations. So that, members might be aware of empty properties the officers know, and we could work with the officer to try and ensure other opportunities are given to because that's the whole purpose of the thing. So I wouldn't mind seeing a breakdown of where we've been achieved so far and where we've been going. And congratulations as well.
Councillor Geddes?
I think Jim's suggestion is first rate, and Mr. O'Neill knows exactly, will know exactly the property I'm alluding to. We worked extremely hard in relation to a property in one of the mid-Galloway villages, and that property's still not been brought back into use, and it would be a prime candidate. And that's the sort of thing, I'm sure that that's no unique. I'm sure that most communities in Dumfries and Galloway will have properties in a similar category, and if we can focus on these, it would be first rate.
Councillor Carson?
Just in the back of that, I think it would be useful if we had maybe a case study of one of the properties that's been brought into use. Certainly, it's maybe my own fault, but I'm not aware of any in my patch, and that there could well be. But I think it'd be useful as an elected member to have a case study that we could actually highlight the work that you're doing and the benefits of it to the community.
Councillor Peacock?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to the officer. Do you work with commercial and businesses as well to bring empty business premises back into use? Are you solely focusing? I appreciate that you split your time at the moment with the borders, etc. But would that be a viable option going forward?
Quite well, but I'll get on the microphone. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I would consider commercial premises as well as empty homes, purely because we're looking more at town centre regeneration. And I have met with the economic regen officer over at Annan, who's also got some funding for areas like Gretna and Lockerbie, Langham, or Lockerbie. I'm also working on a project with the Small Communities Housing Trust on Langham. So the 4 communities. But as far as case studies are concerned, happy to provide those to the committee. I actually have to prepare a report for Shelter Scotland, because obviously they're my managers and my employers at the moment. So happy to provide those to committee if that would help, so you can see the types of techniques that we're using on that. And primarily my work has been focused on the HRA in Dumfries, but we have picked up some outside that area as well. But what I would say is if you do have a property that is quite key to your area, then please do let me have the address, and I can pursue that and try and engage the owners and find ways of bringing it back into use. It's not a problem at all.
If members have no other... Councillor Smith?
Just ask you mentioned you were working number of properties. In fact, I think it's 18 the report in the HRA area in Dumfries. Are you optimistic that any of them are likely to come on stream and basically no longer being empty in the near future?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I mean, the point of the HRA, of course, as you all know, is that these are very hard to treat and hard to engage owners in the HRA, and there is an awful lot of work actually progressing with these properties at the moment where owners have begun repairs to bring them back up to a repairing standard. That includes private owners where they've abandoned properties for 7 or 8 years down in Brewery Street, right up to private landlords who have had abandoned properties in Queen Street for quite some time. We're working together with the housing assistants who have obviously identified the grants and also trying to find out what incentives are available through the home energy service to get secondary incentives put into properties as well as heating systems and insulation. So all these things are going on. We would hope to see some of those back into use, maybe 2 or 3 before the end of this financial year, but certainly I think in 2014-15, a significant number of those either back in use or available to buy in far better condition than they're currently in.
Thanks for that. If members have no other questions, move to recommendations. We're content to agree the allocation of the £20,000 for the 14-15 scheme of assistance budget to enable our council's ongoing participation in the Empty Homes Shared Services project to be extended for a further year. Thank you. Thanks very much. I have no other business deemed urgent at this time. However, under the Local Government Act, we have to consider the adoption of a resolution to exclude the public from a meeting in terms of 50A4 of paragraph 3, part 1 of Schedule 7E of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Members agreed? If we could make sure that there's no members of the public and the transmission in the outer rooms is shut down, please.